The napkin trembled in Sophie's hand, 3 words scrawled in desperate, shaking letters. She is hurting me. Table 7. The old woman with the bruised wrists, the daughter-in-law with the perfect smile and poisonous eyes. Sophie had survived by being invisible, by never making waves, by keeping her head down in this glittering Chicago restaurant where wealthy people played their ugly games behind champagne glasses. But some things you can't unsee. Some silences you can't keep. What Sophie didn't know was that the terrified woman slipping her that napkin was about to change everything: her safety, her future, and the carefully hidden life of the billionaire whose world was about to explode. Stay with me until the end. Like this video and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Sophie Bennett had learned to read a room the way sailors read weather, quickly, quietly, and always watching for storms. Wednesday nights at Marchand's brought out Chicago's elite like moths to flame. All designer clothes and practiced laughter echoing off marble floors that cost more than most people earned in a year. Sophie moved through the dining room with the careful invisibility she'd perfected over 3 years of serving people who never really saw her. Just another face in a black uniform. Efficient hands delivering $100 steaks to tables where the diners spent more on wine than she made in a month. She preferred it that way. Being invisible meant being safe. The bruises on the old woman's wrists weren't invisible, though. Sophie noticed them when she delivered the appetizers to table 7, a prime spot near the window with a view of the city lights spreading out like fallen stars. The woman was maybe 70, 75, dressed in elegant navy silk that whispered old money with every movement. Her white hair was styled in a perfect chignon. Pearl earrings caught the candlelight. Everything about her screamed wealth and refinement. Everything except her eyes. Sophie had seen that look before. In bathroom mirrors during the worst nights of her old life, when everything was falling apart and she didn't know how to stop it. It was the look of someone drowning in plain sight, while everyone around them talked about the weather. More water, please. The younger woman at the table, maybe 40, blonde, beautiful in that sharp, maintained way that required personal trainers and expensive dermatologists, didn't look at Sophie when she spoke. Just held out the old woman's glass like Sophie was a piece of furniture designed to hold bottles. Of course. Sophie kept her voice neutral, professional. She'd learned that trick too. Never let them see you as human. It made their cruelty easier to dismiss. She refilled the glass and started to step back, but the old woman's hand moved, just slightly, just enough. Her fingers brushed Sophie's wrist, and Sophie felt something pressed into her palm. Paper. Folded small and tight. Their eyes met for half a second. The old woman's were blue, faded with age, but sharp with desperate intelligence. Please, those eyes said, please see me. Sophie's heart kicked hard against her ribs. She closed her hand around the paper and kept moving, smooth and unremarkable, just a waitress doing her job. Nobody at table 7 noticed. The blonde woman was talking to the man across from her, distinguished, silver-haired, expensive suit, about some charity gala. The old woman sat silent, hands folded in her lap now, staring at her untouched salad like it held answers to questions she couldn't ask. Sophie made it to the server station before she unfolded the napkin. 3 words, written in shaking ballpoint pen. She is hurting me. Shit. The word came out before Sophie could stop it. What's wrong? Marcus, another server, glanced over while he loaded champagne flutes onto a tray. You look like you saw a ghost. Sophie's mind was racing. The bruises, the silent woman, the way the blonde controlled every word at that table like she was conducting an orchestra. Table 7. Something's wrong. Table 7? Marcus looked across the dining room. That's the Sterling party. You know who that is, right? Victoria Sterling, her mother-in-law, some business associate. Those people tip like they're personally offended by the existence of money. Whatever's wrong, Sophie, it's not worth your job to get involved. But Sophie was already moving toward the back hallway, toward the manager's office, toward the choice she'd spent 3 years trying to avoid making. Getting involved, being seen, risking everything. She'd learned the hard way what happened when you stuck your neck out in other people's problems. She'd lost her career, her home, her reputation, her fiancé, everything, because she'd trusted the wrong person and tried to do the right thing. The corporate world she'd climbed so carefully had turned on her like a pack of wolves, and by the time the lies stopped spreading, there was nothing left of the life she'd built. So she disappeared, became small, became invisible. But standing in that hallway with a napkin that read, "She is hurting me," pressed against her palm, Sophie realized invisibility had limits. Some things you couldn't unsee. Some silences made you complicit. She pulled out her phone and dialed 911. "This is going to be bad," she whispered to herself while the line rang. "This is going to be so bad." The dispatcher answered. 911, what's your emergency? Sophie's voice came out steadier than she felt. "I'm calling from Marchand's restaurant on North Michigan Avenue. There's an elderly woman here. I think she's being abused. She passed me a note saying someone is hurting her. She has visible bruises." Questions followed. Details, table location, description of the people involved. Sophie answered everything while her pulse hammered in her throat and her hands went cold with adrenaline. Through the hallway entrance, she could see table 7. The old woman sat motionless. Victoria Sterling laughed at something the man said, all white teeth and practiced charm. "Officers are on the way," the dispatcher said. "Stay on the line." "I can't." Sophie's throat felt tight. "I have to get back to work, but please hurry." She ended the call before the dispatcher could argue and stood there for a moment, breathing hard, trying to remember how to put on the invisible face, how to walk back into that dining room and pretend everything was normal when she'd just set something in motion that couldn't be stopped. Marcus caught her arm when she emerged from the hallway. "You didn't." "I had to." "Sophie, do you have any idea what you just did? Those people, they could destroy this place. They could destroy you." "They're already destroying that woman." Sophie pulled away gently. "I couldn't just ignore it." "You could have." Marcus wasn't being cruel, just honest. "Everyone else does." He was right, and Sophie knew it. But she picked up her tray anyway and went back to work, moving through the dining room with her heart in her throat and the napkin burning like evidence in her pocket. Table 7 ordered entrees. Sophie delivered them with hands that only shook a little. The old woman, Evelyn, Victoria had called her once, didn't eat. Just moved food around her plate while Victoria dominated the conversation, talking about renovations to the summer house and some fundraiser that needed better catering. The man, whoever he was, mostly nodded and checked his phone. Evelyn's eyes found Sophie once, briefly. Something passed between them. Understanding, maybe. Or just shared fear about what came next. 15 minutes later, the police arrived. Sophie was refilling water glasses at table 12 when she saw them. 2 uniformed officers walking through the entrance with the kind of authority that made the whole restaurant go quiet. Conversations died mid-sentence. Silverware stopped clinking. Even the piano player in the corner stumbled over his keys. The officers walked straight to table 7. "Evelyn Sterling?" The taller officer, a woman with dark hair pulled back tight, spoke directly to the old woman. "We received a call about your welfare. Are you all right, ma'am?" The explosion happened before Evelyn could answer. Victoria shot to her feet so fast her chair screeched against the marble. "Excuse me? What is this? Do you have any idea who we are?" "Ma'am, we're responding to a welfare check." The officer didn't flinch. "We need to speak with Mrs. Sterling." "This is outrageous." Victoria's voice went sharp and cold, cutting through the restaurant like a blade. Every head turned. Every eye watched. "We're having a private dinner. You have no right to harass us." "We have every right to investigate a report of potential abuse." The second officer, older and clearly done with this conversation already, gestured to Evelyn. "Ma'am, we'd like to talk to you separately. Is that all right?" Evelyn opened her mouth, closed it, her hands twisted in her lap. Sophie could see the calculation happening behind those faded blue eyes, the weighing of consequences, the measuring of courage against fear. "Don't say a word, Evelyn." Victoria's voice dropped to something dangerous. "Not one word. These people are clearly confused, or lying. Someone here is making up stories, and when we find out who—" "It was me." Sophie's voice came out smaller than she meant it to, but it carried across the silent restaurant. She stepped forward, still holding her water pitcher, feeling every eye in the room swing toward her like searchlights. Victoria's face when she turned was pure venom. "You?" "She gave me a note." Sophie's hands were shaking now, but she kept going. "It said she is hurting me. I saw the bruises. I called." The old woman's business associate, the man who'd been silent all night, suddenly came alive. "Jesus Christ, Victoria, what did you do?" But Victoria ignored him, her entire focus locked on Sophie like a predator spotting wounded prey. You have no idea what you've done. No idea at all. When my husband hears about this—" "Your husband?" The female officer's eyebrow went up. "Mrs. Sterling, is this woman your daughter-in-law?" Evelyn nodded, barely, just a tiny dip of her chin. "And you live with her?" Another nod. "Ma'am, we're going to need to see those bruises." "Absolutely not." Victoria grabbed for Evelyn's arm, but the older officer stepped between them faster than his age suggested he could move. "Step back, ma'am. Now." The restaurant had gone so quiet Sophie could hear her own heartbeat. She stood there with the water pitcher clutched against her chest, watching Victoria Sterling's carefully constructed world start to crack, and wondered if she'd just saved someone or destroyed herself. Probably both. Evelyn stood slowly, her movements careful, like something inside her hurt. She looked at Victoria once, a long, level look that held years of something Sophie couldn't quite name, then turned to the officers. "I'll show you," she said quietly. "I'll show you everything." The words fell into the silence like stones into still water, and Sophie watched the ripples spread. Victoria's face went white, then red. "You ungrateful! After everything we've done for you." "We're going to need you to come down to the station," the male officer said, pulling out handcuffs with practiced efficiency. "You have the right to remain silent." The rest of the Miranda rights got lost in Victoria's shrieking, a sound so sharp and furious it seemed impossible it could come from someone who'd been laughing about summer houses 5 minutes ago. The business associate backed away from the table like he'd found himself sitting next to a bomb. Other diners pulled out phones, filming, probably already posting to social media. Sophie just stood there, numb and terrified, and somehow certain she'd just ended her life in Chicago. The officers escorted Victoria toward the exit, still screaming about lawyers and lawsuits and people who would regret this, while Evelyn followed more slowly, supported by the female officer. As they passed Sophie, Evelyn reached out and squeezed her hand once. "Thank you," she whispered. Just that. 2 words. Then they were gone, leaving Sophie alone in a restaurant full of staring strangers and the wreckage of whatever came next. The manager fired her in his office 20 minutes later. "I don't have a choice, Sophie." David looked genuinely upset, which somehow made it worse. The Sterlings, their family, they're major investors in the restaurant group. Victoria Sterling's husband is Ethan Sterling. Do you know who that is? Sophie shook her head, numb. Billionaire. Tech CEO. His company basically runs half the software you've probably used today. And you just had his wife arrested in the middle of dinner service. She was hurting his mother. I believe you. I do. But that doesn't matter. Corporate already called. They want you gone before the story hits the news. David pulled out an envelope, his hands shaking slightly. 2 weeks severance. I'm sorry, you're a good server. This is just... it's too big. Sophie took the envelope and walked out through the kitchen to avoid the dining room, out into the Chicago night, where the November cold hit like a slap. She stood on the sidewalk in her uniform with her tips from the night, $83, and 2 weeks' pay that wouldn't cover her rent, and laughed. It came out sharp and slightly broken, the laugh of someone who'd gambled and lost and wasn't even surprised anymore. Stupid, she told herself. So stupid. But the thing was, she didn't regret it. Standing there in the cold, jobless, and probably unhireable once this story got around, Sophie didn't regret calling 911. Didn't regret speaking up. Some silences were worse than consequences. She'd learned that the hard way before. Apparently, she was a slow learner. Sophie was halfway to the train when a car pulled up beside her. Sleek, black, probably worth more than she'd earned in 5 years. The back window rolled down, and a man's face appeared. Handsome in that sharp, symmetrical way that usually came from good genes and better money. Dark hair, darker eyes, a jaw that looked like it had been designed by someone who took their work seriously. He looked exhausted. Sophie Bennett? His voice was rough, like he'd been shouting, or maybe crying. She stopped walking. How do you know my name? The police told me. You're the one who called. He opened the car door and stepped out, and Sophie realized he was tall, probably 6'2", wearing a suit that had cost more than her car before she'd sold it. I'm Ethan Sterling. Oh no. Sophie's first instinct was to run. Her second was to apologize. Her third was to just stand there frozen while her brain tried to catch up with the night's escalating chaos. Ethan saw her face and held up both hands. I'm not here to yell at you. I'm here to say thank you. That broke through the paralysis. Thank you? My mother just told me everything. How long Victoria's been... His jaw clenched so hard Sophie heard his teeth grind. How she was hiding it, lying, making my mother lie. He ran a hand through his hair, destroying whatever style it had held. I didn't know. I should have known, but I didn't. And you saw it. You did something. I just made a phone call. You risked your job. The manager told me he fired you. Ethan's voice went flat with anger. I'll fix that. I'll make sure you're rehired with back pay, and don't. The word came out sharper than Sophie meant it to. I don't want your charity or your guilt money. I did what anyone should have done. But nobody else did. Ethan stepped closer and Sophie fought the urge to back up. Everyone else in that restaurant saw my mother tonight, saw the bruises, saw Victoria controlling her, and everyone looked away. Except you. Sophie's throat felt tight. I know what it's like when everyone looks away. Something shifted in Ethan's expression. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. Yeah, I'm starting to understand that too. They stood there on the sidewalk while Chicago moved around them, cars honking, people hurrying past, the city doing its thing without caring about the small human dramas playing out on its streets. Sophie was cold and tired and unemployed, and this man was a billionaire whose wife she'd just helped arrest, and none of this made any sense. Have you eaten? Ethan asked suddenly. Sophie blinked. What? Dinner. Have you eaten? Because I was supposed to have dinner with Victoria and my business partner tonight, and instead I spent 2 hours at a police station learning that my marriage has been a lie and my mother's been suffering in my own house. His laugh was bitter. So I haven't eaten either, and I don't want to go home yet, and you probably don't want to be alone after the night you just had. I don't even know you. No, but you saved my mother. That's something. He gestured to the car. There's a diner 3 blocks from here. Best pancakes in Chicago at midnight. My treat. No strings. Just let me say thank you properly. Every instinct Sophie had said this was a bad idea. She didn't know this man, didn't know what he wanted, didn't know if getting into a car with a stranger, billionaire or not, was the kind of choice that ended badly. But she was cold and hungry and so tired of being invisible. Pancakes, she said? The best. Sophie looked at him, really looked, saw the exhaustion in his eyes that matched her own, saw something broken around the edges that seemed real, not performed. Saw a man who'd just had his world rearranged and was doing what she'd done 3 years ago when everything fell apart, looking for something solid to grab onto. Okay, she said, but I'm ordering coffee too, and hash browns. The smile that crossed his face was small and sad and genuine. Deal. She got in the car. The diner was exactly what Ethan promised. Worn vinyl booths, fluorescent lights that hummed, a waitress named Dolores who called everyone honey and didn't care that one of her customers was worth $8 billion. Sophie slid into a booth across from Ethan and felt something in her chest unclench slightly. This she understood. Diners at midnight. Coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since the Carter administration. People who were too tired to pretend. You come here a lot? She asked, while Dolores poured coffee without asking. Used to, before... Ethan stopped, started again. My wife didn't like places like this. Said they were beneath us. The bitterness in his voice could have flavored the coffee. Guess I should have paid more attention to what else she thought was beneath her. Sophie wrapped her hands around the mug, letting the warmth seep in. How long has she been hurting your mother? 6 months, apparently, since my father died and Mom moved in with us. Ethan stared at his own coffee like it held answers. Victoria was always, she could be cold, demanding, but I thought that was just her way. She came from money, expected certain standards. I didn't realize expecting standards meant tormenting an elderly woman. People are good at hiding things. Yeah. He looked up at her. The police said you saw bruises, that my mother passed you a note. Sophie pulled out the napkin, still folded in her pocket, and slid it across the table. 3 words that had changed everything. Ethan picked it up with shaking hands, read it, closed his eyes. Jesus. I'm sorry. Don't be. You gave her something I didn't, a way out. He opened his eyes again, and they were wet. I'm her son. I'm supposed to protect her. And instead I was so buried in work, so focused on my daughter and the company and keeping everything running, that I didn't see what was happening in my own house. The food arrived. Pancakes, hash browns, eggs for Sophie. A burger for Ethan that he didn't touch. Dolores refilled their coffee and disappeared again, gracefully ignoring the fact that one of her customers was crying quietly into his napkin. You have a daughter? Sophie asked, because sometimes the only way through heavy moments was to step sideways into different ones. Lily, she's 5. Ethan pulled out his phone and showed her a picture. A small girl with dark curls and her father's eyes, grinning at the camera with 2 missing front teeth. She's asleep right now, home with the nanny. I haven't figured out how to tell her yet. That her mother's been arrested? That her mother's a monster. Ethan put the phone away. How do you explain that to a 5-year-old? Sophie didn't have an answer. She ate her pancakes and let the silence sit between them, not uncomfortable exactly, just heavy with all the things neither of them could fix. The manager said he fired you, Ethan said finally, because of me, my family, our investment in the restaurant. It's fine. It's not fine. You did the right thing and lost your job. He leaned forward. Let me help. I can make a call. Get you rehired. Or find you something better. My company's always looking for... No. Sophie set down her fork. I appreciate it, really, but I don't want your help. Why not? Because 3 years ago, someone had helped her. Someone had offered her opportunities and connections and everything she thought she wanted, and it had all been a lie designed to use her and destroy her when she was no longer convenient. Because accepting help from powerful people had consequences Sophie was still paying. Because she'd learned that being invisible was safer than being obligated. But she couldn't say all that to a stranger in a diner at midnight, so she just said, I've been down that road before. It didn't end well. Ethan studied her for a long moment. You said earlier you know what it's like when everyone looks away. What did you mean? Sophie's first instinct was to deflect, to smile and change the subject and keep her past buried where it belonged. But something about this night, the exhaustion, the honesty, the way the universe had smashed both their lives open in the same restaurant, made her want to tell the truth. I used to work in corporate, she said slowly. Marketing. I was good at it. Worked my way up to senior strategist at a firm downtown. Had a fiancé, an apartment, a future. She stirred her coffee, watching the cream swirl. Then I found out my boss was embezzling. Not just a little, millions. And he'd set up the accounts to make it look like I was helping him. Ethan went very still. What happened? I reported it. Thought I was doing the right thing. Thought the truth would protect me. Sophie's laugh was hollow. Instead, he claimed I was the one stealing and trying to frame him. He had friends in management, evidence he'd manufactured, a whole story ready to go. By the time anyone investigated properly, I'd been fired, blacklisted, and my fiancé had left me because he believed the lies. Jesus Christ. I ended up homeless for 3 months, burned through my savings fighting legal battles I couldn't win, lost everything. She met Ethan's eyes. So when you ask why I don't want your help, it's because I've seen what happens when you put your trust in powerful people who say they're grateful. It never ends the way they promise. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Dolores came by to refill coffee again, read the room, and backed away without a word. I'm sorry, Ethan said finally. I don't know what to say. That's unforgivable. It's over now. I survived. Found the waitressing job, kept my head down, stayed invisible. Sophie shrugged like it didn't still hurt. Safer that way. Until tonight. Until tonight, she agreed. Apparently I don't learn from my mistakes. Or maybe you do. Ethan's voice was quiet, but intense. Maybe you learned that some things are worth the risk, that staying silent has its own cost. Sophie thought about that, about the napkin in her pocket and the bruises on an old woman's wrists and the choice she'd made even knowing it might destroy her. Maybe, she said. They finished eating in a silence that felt less heavy now, more like shared understanding. When Dolores brought the check, Ethan paid it and added a tip that made the waitress's eyes go wide. Outside, the November wind had picked up, cutting through Sophie's thin jacket. Ethan noticed and shrugged off his suit coat, draping it over her shoulders before she could protest. "I'll get it back to you," she said. "Keep it. I have others." He smiled, and it was the first real smile she'd seen from him all night. Considerate payment for pancakes and honesty. His car was still parked at the curb, the driver patient and professional. Ethan opened the back door, then paused. "If you change your mind about the job help, I won't. My mother will want to thank you properly, once things settle down." He pulled out a business card and pressed it into her hand. "That's my personal cell. If you need anything, or if Victoria tries anything, or if you just want to talk." Sophie looked at the card. Heavy stock. Embossed lettering. The kind of thing that screamed money and power and everything she'd learned to avoid. But she pocketed it anyway. "Take care of your mother," she said, "and your daughter." "I will." Ethan hesitated, then added, "You're braver than you think, Sophie Bennett. I hope you know that." Before she could respond, he got in the car and was gone, leaving Sophie standing on a Chicago sidewalk at 1 a.m, wearing a billionaire's jacket and wondering what the hell she'd just set in motion. She walked to the train with the business card burning in her pocket like a promise or a threat. Probably both. When she got back to her studio apartment, cramped and cold and home, Sophie hung up the jacket carefully and pulled out her phone. 3 missed calls from her roommate. A text from Marcus asking if she was okay. 17 notifications from social media where video of the arrest was already going viral. She ignored all of it and stood at her window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Evelyn Sterling was safe tonight for the first time in months. Somewhere out there, a little girl was sleeping peacefully, not knowing yet that her world was about to change. Somewhere out there, Ethan Sterling was probably not sleeping at all, dealing with the wreckage of his marriage and the guilt of not seeing what was right in front of him. And here, in a studio apartment that cost too much and held too little, Sophie Bennett stood in a borrowed jacket that smelled like expensive cologne and wondered if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. Or the best decision. The thing about being invisible was that it kept you safe, but it also kept you small. And Sophie was tired of being small. She pulled out Ethan's business card one more time, studied it in the dim light from the street, and made a decision. She'd stay visible, just a little longer, just to see what happened. What happened next would change everything, but that's a different part of the story. Sophie woke up Thursday morning to 17 missed calls and a headache that felt like someone had taken a hammer to her skull. Her phone kept buzzing with notifications, news alerts, social media tags, messages from numbers she didn't recognize. She turned it off and stared at her ceiling, trying to convince herself that yesterday had been some kind of stress-induced hallucination. It hadn't worked by the time she gave up and checked the news. "Chicago Waitress exposes billionaire's wife in shocking restaurant arrest," read the first headline. Below it, a photo someone had taken on their phone. Victoria Sterling being led out of Marchand's in handcuffs, her face twisted in fury. The story had everything the internet loved: wealth, scandal, a dramatic public scene. Sophie's name was mentioned in every article, sometimes with photos pulled from her old corporate social media accounts that she'd forgotten to delete, her past and present colliding in the worst possible way. The second call came at 9:15, unknown number. Sophie almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Miss Bennett?" A woman's voice, crisp and professional. "This is Catherine Walsh. I'm calling on behalf of Evelyn Sterling. Mrs. Sterling would very much like to speak with you, if you're available." Sophie sat up so fast her head spun. "Is she okay? Did something happen?" "She's perfectly safe, thanks to you. She's staying at her son's primary residence under protective care, but she's been quite insistent about thanking you personally." A pause. "Would 11 o'clock work? A car can pick you up." Every reasonable instinct Sophie had screamed to say no, to stay invisible, to let this whole mess fade into someone else's drama while she figured out how to pay next month's rent without a job. But she thought about those faded blue eyes in the restaurant, the desperate note, the bruises. 11 is fine," Sophie heard herself say, "but I can take the train. I don't need a car." Mr. Sterling insisted. "He's concerned about press attention following you." Catherine's voice warmed slightly. "Between you and me, he's not wrong. There are already photographers outside your building." Sophie looked out her window. Sure enough, 2 guys with cameras stood on the sidewalk across the street, smoking and watching her door. "Fantastic," she muttered. "The car will be discreet, black sedan, license plate HDK7392. Driver's name is Marcus, different Marcus than your coworker, I assume, from the background check. You ran a background check on me? Standard procedure when someone enters the Sterling family sphere. I hope you don't mind. Catherine didn't sound like she particularly cared if Sophie minded. 11 o'clock, Miss Bennett. I'll text you the address. The call ended before Sophie could argue. She spent the next hour and 45 minutes trying to figure out what you wore to meet the elderly woman you saved from abuse and her billionaire son. Everything in her closet looked wrong, too casual, too worn, too clearly purchased from discount racks during better times. She finally settled on black pants and a gray sweater that didn't have any visible stains, pulled her dark hair into something resembling a professional bun, and told herself this was fine. It wasn't fine. Nothing about this was fine. The car arrived exactly at 11. Sophie slipped out the back entrance of her building to avoid the photographers and found the sedan idling in the alley. The driver, Marcus apparently, though he looked nothing like her former coworker, opened the door without a word. The Sterling residence turned out to be a converted brownstone in Lincoln Park, the kind of place that probably cost more than Sophie would earn in 3 lifetimes. Understated from the outside, all old brick and ivy, but the kind of understated that screamed money to anyone who knew how to look. Catherine Walsh met her at the door, 50-something, steel gray hair and a perfect bob, wearing a suit that probably cost what Sophie used to make in a month. Her handshake was firm and assessing. Miss Bennett, thank you for coming. Mrs. Sterling is in the sitting room. She's been asking about you all morning. The house was exactly what Sophie expected, and somehow worse. High ceilings, original woodwork, art on the walls that was probably worth more than her entire education. Everything tasteful and expensive and designed to make people like Sophie feel small. She hated that it worked. Evelyn Sterling sat in a wingback chair by a window overlooking a private garden, wrapped in a cashmere blanket despite the room's warmth. She looked smaller than she had in the restaurant, more fragile, but her eyes when she saw Sophie were sharp and clear. You came. Evelyn's voice was stronger than Sophie expected. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure either, Sophie admitted, because lying seemed pointless now. Sit, please. Evelyn gestured to the chair across from her. Catherine, could you bring tea and tell my son his guest is here? Catherine disappeared, leaving Sophie alone with the woman she'd saved. The silence stretched out, not uncomfortable exactly, but heavy with things that needed saying, and neither of them quite knew how to start. Your wrists, Sophie said finally, nodding to where Evelyn's sleeves had ridden up slightly, revealing the fading bruises. How bad is it? Bad enough. Though the doctors say nothing's broken, just bruised. Evelyn pulled the sleeves down carefully. She was always careful about that. Nothing that would show. Nothing that would make people ask questions. How long? 6 months, since my husband passed and Ethan insisted I move in with them. Evelyn's hands twisted in her lap. Victoria never wanted me there, made that clear from the start, but Ethan insisted, and what Victoria wants doesn't always align with what Ethan decides. So she took it out on you. In small ways at first, comments, criticisms. Then she started isolating me, taking my phone, telling the staff not to disturb me, making sure I was never alone with Ethan long enough to say anything. Evelyn's voice went flat. The physical part started about 2 months ago. A grab here, a push there, always when no one else was around, always with a smile afterward, like we were sharing a joke. Sophie felt sick. Why didn't you tell him? Because I'm a foolish old woman who didn't want to ruin her son's marriage. Because Victoria said if I told anyone, she'd make sure Ethan took Lily away from me. Because I was scared. Evelyn met her eyes. You understand fear, don't you, Miss Bennett? Yeah, Sophie said quietly. I understand fear. The door opened and Ethan walked in, looking like he hadn't slept in a week. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie missing, his hair sticking up like he'd been running his hands through it. When he saw Sophie, something in his expression shifted. You're here. I wasn't sure you'd come. Your mother asked. Sophie stood, suddenly awkward. I didn't want to be rude. Sit, both of you. Evelyn waved them back down with the imperious gesture of someone used to being obeyed. Ethan, you look terrible. When was the last time you slept? Tuesday, maybe. He collapsed into a chair and scrubbed his face with both hands. It's been a long 2 days. Catherine returned with tea service. Actual china, actual tea leaves, the whole production that made Sophie acutely aware she was in a different world than the one she'd been living in. She accepted a cup because refusing seemed worse and tried not to think about how much the saucer probably cost. Victoria's out on bail, Ethan said without preamble. Her father posted it. But there's a restraining order. She can't come within 500 feet of my mother or my home. And Lily? Evelyn asked. Doesn't understand yet. I told her Mommy had to go away for work. That Grandma's going to stay with us for a while. His voice cracked slightly. I don't know how to explain this to a 5-year-old. You tell her the truth, Sophie said, then immediately regretted speaking. This wasn't her business, wasn't her family. She was just the waitress who'd made a phone call. But Ethan was looking at her like she'd said something profound. What truth? That her grandmother was being hurt. That you stopped it. That sometimes grown-ups make bad choices, even people we love. Sophie set down her teacup before her shaking hands betrayed her. Kids understand more than we think. It's the lying that confuses them. You sound like you know something about that. My dad used to hit my mom. Everyone pretended it wasn't happening. That was worse than the actual hitting sometimes. The pretending. Sophie hadn't talked about this in years. Didn't know why it was coming out now, except that the whole room felt like a confessional, and she was too tired to keep lying. When I was 8, my mom finally left him. She sat me down and told me the truth. It didn't make it hurt less, but at least I wasn't confused anymore. The silence that followed was broken only by the ticking of an antique clock on the mantel. Evelyn reached over and squeezed Sophie's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. Thank you, she said simply. For what? For being honest. For not pretending. Evelyn looked at her son. Ethan, this girl saved my life. Do you understand that? Another week, another month. I don't know what Victoria would have done. I know, Mom. Ethan's voice was rough. I know. And now she's lost her job because of it, because our family's money scared her employer. Evelyn turned to Sophie. Catherine told me what happened, how the restaurant let you go. Sophie shifted uncomfortably. It's fine, I'll find something else. It's not fine. Ethan leaned forward, and Sophie could see the CEO in him now. The man used to solving problems, fixing things, making the world bend to his will. Let me help. I can make calls, get you rehired, or find you something better. My company— No! Sophie stood up, the teacup rattling. I appreciate it, really, but I don't want your charity. It's not charity. It is, and I've been down that road before. She could feel her pulse hammering. 3 years ago, someone powerful offered to help me, said they were grateful for what I'd done. It ended with me homeless and blacklisted and barely surviving. So thank you, but no. She was halfway to the door when Evelyn's voice stopped her. What if it wasn't charity? What if it was a job offer? Sophie turned. I don't understand. I need an assistant, someone to help me manage my affairs, handle correspondence, organize my schedule, someone I can trust. Evelyn's eyes were sharp despite her frail appearance. Someone who's already proven they'll stand up for me when no one else will. Mom, you don't need— Ethan started. I absolutely do. Victoria isolated me by controlling my access to everything, my phone, my contacts, my independence. I won't let that happen again. Evelyn's voice was steel wrapped in silk. I want Sophie. You don't even know me, Sophie protested. I know you risked everything to help a stranger. I know you're smart enough to have built a corporate career before someone destroyed it. I know you're honest enough to refuse help when you think it's charity. Evelyn smiled. That's enough for me. Is it enough for you? Sophie looked between them, the old woman who'd survived 6 months of abuse, the son who'd failed to see it. This wasn't her world. These weren't her people. Every survival instinct she'd developed over 3 years of keeping her head down screamed at her to walk away. But she thought about her empty apartment and her empty bank account, and the photographers outside her building waiting for her to become a story instead of a person. She thought about invisibility and safety and all the ways staying small had kept her alive but not living. What's the salary? She asked. Ethan named a figure that made Sophie's knees weak. It was more than she'd made in corporate, more than she'd ever imagined earning again. That's too much, she said automatically. That's market rate for an executive assistant, which is what you'd be. Evelyn wasn't smiling now. I'm not offering you charity, Sophie. I'm offering you a job, one you're qualified for, and that I need filled. The question is whether you're brave enough to take it. The challenge in those words hit Sophie like a physical thing. Brave enough. Like bravery was something she possessed instead of something she faked when she had no other choice. I need to think about it, she said. Of course. Evelyn settled back in her chair. Take the weekend. Catherine will send you the official offer letter with full details. You can decide then. Catherine appeared like she'd been summoned by telepathy, showing Sophie to the door with the same professional courtesy she'd shown her in. But at the threshold, she paused. For what it's worth, Miss Bennett, I think you'd be good at this. Mrs. Sterling needs someone who isn't afraid of powerful people. That seems to be you. Sophie didn't know how to respond to that, so she just nodded and left. The car ride back to her apartment gave her too much time to think. The offer was insane. The salary was insane. The whole situation was insane. She was a fired waitress with a ruined reputation and a habit of making terrible decisions when powerful people were involved. But the thing was, she was already thinking about saying yes. The photographers were still outside her building when she got back. They swarmed the moment she stepped out of the car, cameras flashing, voices overlapping. Sophie, how do you feel about Victoria Sterling's arrest? Did you know who Evelyn Sterling was when you called the police? Are you involved with Ethan Sterling? That last question hit like a slap. Sophie pushed through them without answering, her face burning, and made it to her door before one of them grabbed her arm. Just one comment, come on! Let go of me. Her voice came out harder than she expected. The public has a right to know. I said let go. The hand dropped, and Sophie made it inside, slamming the door behind her. Her hands were shaking. Her whole body was shaking. She slid down to sit on the floor with her back against the door and tried to remember how to breathe. This was it. This was what happened when you stopped being invisible. When you let the world see you. It grabbed and pulled and demanded pieces of you until there was nothing left. Her phone rang. Unknown number again. Sophie almost didn't answer, but something made her check. A text from Ethan's number. I saw the photographers. Are you okay? She stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, fine. Used to worse. His response came immediately. That's not actually fine. And you shouldn't have to be used to worse. Welcome to life as a poor person, she sent back, then immediately regretted it. Too bitter, too real. But Ethan's response surprised her. Fair point. Listen, I know you don't want charity, but I can have security keep the press away from your building. Just say the word. Sophie thought about the photographer's hand on her arm, about walking to the train tomorrow through a gauntlet of cameras and questions, about trying to find a new job while her face was all over the news as the waitress who exposed a billionaire's wife. Okay, she sent, thank you. No, thank you. For everything. She put the phone down and sat there on her floor, trying to figure out when her life had turned into something she didn't recognize. 2 days ago, she'd been invisible, safe, small. Now she was headline news and job hunting and seriously considering working for a family that existed in a tax bracket she couldn't even comprehend. The worst part was, she was pretty sure she was going to say yes to Evelyn's offer, because the alternative was going back to invisible. And Sophie was starting to realize that invisible wasn't the same thing as safe. It was just another kind of cage. Friday morning brought a registered letter from Catherine Walsh containing the official job offer, complete with salary breakdown, benefits package, and a start date of Monday if Sophie accepted. It also brought a cease and desist letter from Victoria Sterling's lawyers, threatening to sue Sophie for defamation, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Sophie was reading the lawsuit threat for the third time when her phone rang. Ethan, again. Did you get the legal threat? No greeting, just straight to business. Yeah, it's creative. I especially like the part where I apparently orchestrated the whole thing to trap you into a relationship. That's insane. That's rich people defending their own. Sophie was surprised by how calm she sounded. Maybe she'd run out of panic. Your lawyer's better than hers? Significantly. And they're already drafting a response. Victoria won't get anywhere with this. It's just intimidation. It's working. A pause. Sophie, I'm kidding, mostly. She set the letter down. I've dealt with worse legal threats. At least this time I actually did something to deserve them. You saved my mother's life. You don't deserve to be sued for that. No, but that's how the world works. Sophie surprised herself by laughing. Rich people get mad. Poor people get threatened. Tale as old as time. You're taking this remarkably well. I'm really not. I'm just good at pretending. She looked at the job offer letter still sitting on her kitchen table. Your mom's serious about that job? Completely. She hasn't stopped talking about you since yesterday. Apparently you're exactly what she needs. He hesitated. Are you considering it? I don't know. Maybe. Probably. Sophie ran her hand through her hair. It's a lot of money for what seems like a pretty straightforward job. My mother's affairs are more complicated than you'd think. Her husband, my father, left her a substantial portfolio that needs managing. Plus, she's involved in several charities, serves on 3 boards, and has more social obligations than I can keep track of. Another pause. And right now, she needs someone she can trust. That's worth more than the salary suggests. Trust. There was that word again. Sophie thought about Evelyn's sharp eyes and careful words, about the way she'd challenged Sophie to be brave enough to take the job. I need to tell you something, Sophie said slowly, about what happened to me before. The embezzlement thing. You don't owe me your history. I do if I'm going to work for your family. You should know what you're getting. She took a breath. My old boss, the one who was stealing, his name was Richard Harding. He's still out there, still working, still respected. When I reported him, he didn't just get away with it. He destroyed me specifically and carefully. Made sure I'd never work in corporate again. Made sure everyone knew my name and my face and the lie he told about me. Sophie, I'm telling you this because if I take this job, he's going to see it. He's going to know I'm connected to your family, and he's going to try to ruin it. Her voice was shaking now. I don't want to bring that into your mother's life. She's been through enough. The silence stretched out so long, Sophie thought the call had dropped. Then Ethan said quietly, What's the name of his company? Why? Because I want to know who I'm dealing with if he comes after you. Or my mother. Or my family. His voice had gone cold in a way that made Sophie's spine straighten. You're worried about bringing your past into our life. I'm worried about letting someone threaten you without consequences. You can't. This isn't your fight. It is if you work for us. It is if someone threatens my mother's assistant. A pause. And it is if I decide I care about what happens to you, which I apparently do. Sophie didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to process the idea that someone with actual power might stand beside her instead of using her and throwing her away. Hartman and Associates, she said finally. Downtown. Big glass building on Wacker Drive. Got it. I'll have someone look into him. Ethan, you really don't have to. Yes, I do. You saved my mother. The least I can do is make sure the person who hurt you doesn't get to do it again. After the call ended, Sophie sat at her kitchen table with both letters in front of her, the job offer and the lawsuit threat. 2 possible futures, 2 versions of who she could be. She picked up a pen and signed the job offer. Catherine Walsh called within an hour to confirm receipt and schedule orientation for Monday morning. Sophie spent the weekend in a haze of paperwork and second-guessing, fielding calls from concerned former coworkers and ignoring voicemails from reporters who'd somehow gotten her number. The security Ethan had promised appeared Saturday morning, 2 professionals who positioned themselves discreetly outside her building and made the photographers disappear like magic. Sophie hated that she needed protection, hated that her life had become something requiring armed guards, but she also appreciated being able to walk to the store without cameras in her face. Sunday night, she stood in front of her closet trying to figure out what you wore to your first day working for a billionaire's mother and came up empty. Everything she owned was wrong. Too casual, too cheap, too marked by 3 years of barely surviving. She was still staring at her inadequate wardrobe when her phone chimed. A text from an unknown number with a photo attached, a sleek black card with gold lettering. Catherine Walsh gave me your number. This is Evelyn. A small welcome gift will be delivered to your door in 10 minutes. Business-appropriate attire for your first week. Please don't argue. I need my assistant to look the part, and I haven't had anyone to shop for in months. You'd be doing me a favor. Sophie wanted to argue, wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain some scrap of independence and dignity. The doorbell rang 8 minutes later. 2 large boxes from a boutique Sophie recognized but had never been able to afford. Inside, carefully wrapped, were 5 complete outfits: pants, blouses, a blazer, even shoes that were somehow exactly her size. Nothing flashy, nothing designer obvious, just beautiful, professional clothes that fit perfectly and probably cost more than her entire current wardrobe combined. The card tucked inside read, "Welcome to the team. Tomorrow we start rebuilding everything they took from you." Evelyn Sophie sat on her floor surrounded by tissue paper and expensive fabric and cried for the first time since Wednesday night. Not sad tears exactly, just overwhelmed, exhausted, terrified. And maybe, buried under all of that, something that felt almost like hope. Monday morning came too fast and too slow. Sophie put on one of the outfits Evelyn had sent. Charcoal pants, a cream blouse, the blazer that made her look like someone who belonged in boardrooms instead of diners. She barely recognized herself in the mirror. The car arrived at 8:30. Catherine met her at the Sterling residence with a schedule that made Sophie's head spin. Meetings with Evelyn's financial advisors, calls with charity directors, a lunch with board members from one of the organizations Evelyn supported. "We're throwing you in the deep end," Catherine admitted as they walked through the house toward Evelyn's office. "But Mrs. Sterling believes you can swim." Evelyn's office was smaller than Sophie expected, more personal. Photos on the desk, Ethan at various ages, a little girl who must be Lily, an older man who was probably Evelyn's late husband. Bookshelves lined with actual books worn from reading. A window overlooking the garden where morning light pooled on hardwood floors. Evelyn herself sat at the desk, looking stronger than she had on Thursday. The bruises on her wrists were fading. Her eyes were clear. "Sophie, you came. You're paying me enough that I'd be stupid not to." Sophie tried for humor and landed somewhere near honesty. Evelyn smiled. "Sit. We have a lot to cover." The first week blurred together in a chaos of learning curves and mistakes and small victories. Sophie learned how to manage Evelyn's calendar, field calls from people whose names she recognized from the news, navigate the social politics of charity boards where everyone smiled and no one meant it. She learned that Evelyn was sharper than anyone gave her credit for, that her retirement from her husband's company had been more forced than chosen, that she'd spent 40 years building connections and influence that Victoria had tried to systematically destroy. She learned that Ethan checked in on his mother 3 times a day, that he was fighting a vicious divorce battle while trying to shield his daughter from the worst of it, that he hadn't slept properly in weeks. She learned that Lily was shy and sweet and terrified of loud noises, that she missed her mother even though Victoria had never been particularly kind to her, that she'd started having nightmares. And she learned that working for Evelyn Sterling meant becoming part of something bigger than just a job. It meant family dinners where Lily sat in Sophie's lap and asked questions about everything. It meant late nights when Evelyn needed to talk about her marriage, her regrets, her fears about being a burden. It meant Ethan showing up exhausted and finding Sophie still working and insisting she go home, then walking her to the car because he worried about her safety. It meant being visible in ways that still scared her but also felt right. 2 weeks into the job, Sophie was working late in Evelyn's office when Ethan appeared in the doorway. "You're still here?" She looked up from the grant proposal she was reviewing. "Your mother wants this submitted by Friday. I'm making sure the numbers line up." "It's 9:30. And?" He walked into the room and sat down across from her desk. Technically Evelyn's desk, but it was starting to feel like Sophie's too. "You don't have to work yourself to death to prove you deserve to be here." "Don't I?" Sophie set down her pen. "Everyone's watching. Waiting for me to fail. Waiting to prove I'm just some charity case you felt guilty about." "Who's everyone?" "Your mother's friends, the board members. That woman Margaret who keeps asking me where I went to school and looking disappointed when I tell her State University instead of Princeton." Sophie's laugh was bitter. "I can see it in their faces. They think I don't belong here." "Do you think you belong here?" The question caught her off guard. Sophie looked around the office, the expensive furniture, the art on the walls, the laptop that cost more than her first car. "Honestly, no. I feel like I'm playing dress-up in someone else's life." "Yeah." Ethan leaned back in the chair. "I know that feeling. You're a billionaire CEO. How would you know that feeling? Because I'm a billionaire CEO whose wife was abusing his mother in his own house, and he was too blind to see it. Because I'm a single father who has no idea how to help his daughter process trauma. Because half the time I feel like I'm faking competence and hoping no one notices. He met her eyes. We're all playing dress-up, Sophie. Some of us just have more expensive costumes. The honesty in his voice made something in Sophie's chest tighten. Your mother said something similar about how everyone's just pretending they know what they're doing. My mother's a smart woman. You should listen to her. I'm trying to. Sophie looked down at the grant proposal. She wants to expand the domestic violence support program, triple the funding, create a new shelter. Because of what happened to her? Because she doesn't want anyone else to go through it. She told me, Sophie's voice caught. She told me that if she hadn't had money, if she hadn't had you, she would have had nowhere to go. And that most women in her situation don't have those options. Ethan was quiet for a moment. That's why she hired you, you know. Not just because you saved her, but because you understand what it's like to have nowhere to go. She told you about my past? She told me you'd survived something that destroyed you and came out the other side still willing to help people. That's all I needed to know. He stood up. Come on, I'm driving you home. I can take the car service. I know you can, but I'm going that direction anyway, and I'd like the company. His smile was tired but genuine. Humor me? Sophie saved her work and followed him out to his car. Not the sedan with the driver, but a regular SUV he drove himself. It felt oddly normal, climbing into the passenger seat while a billionaire adjusted the mirrors and complained about Chicago traffic. Lily asked about you today, Ethan said as they pulled away from the house. What did she ask? If you were going to stay, if you were going to leave like Mommy did. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. I didn't know how to answer that. Sophie watched the city lights slide past the window. I'm not planning to leave. Plans change. Yeah, but right now this is the best thing I've had in 3 years. Your mother's teaching me things, trusting me with real work, treating me like I'm capable of more than taking drink orders. She turned to look at him. I'm not going to walk away from that without a fight. Something shifted in Ethan's expression. Good, because my mother's already planning to give you more responsibility. And Lily's getting attached, and He stopped, started again. I'd miss you if you left. The words hung in the air between them, too honest and too complicated. Sophie didn't know how to respond, so she just said, I'd miss you too. They drove the rest of the way in comfortable silence, but when Ethan pulled up outside her building, he didn't immediately unlock the doors. Sophie, the thing you were worried about, your old boss coming after you because you work for us? Her stomach dropped. Did he? My lawyers found some interesting things in his company's financial records, things that suggest the embezzlement never actually stopped. He just got better at hiding it. Ethan's smile was sharp and cold. We're documenting everything, building a case. When we're ready, Richard Harding is going to have a very bad day. Sophie stared at him. Why would you do that? Because he hurt you, because he's still hurting other people, and because I don't like bullies. He finally unlocked the doors. Get some sleep. You look exhausted. She got out of the car but leaned back in before closing the door. Thank you for all of this. You saved my family, Sophie. This is the least I can do. She watched him drive away, standing on the sidewalk until his taillights disappeared around the corner, and wondered when exactly her life had turned into something that felt like it might actually be worth living again. The first crack in Sophie's carefully rebuilt world came on a Tuesday morning in early December, 6 weeks into her new life. She was reviewing Evelyn's calendar over coffee when her phone buzzed with a notification from a news app she'd forgotten she had installed. The headline made her stomach drop. Former corporate strategist Sophie Bennett, from fraud allegations to billionaire's inner circle. What's the real story? The article was vicious. It dredged up every detail of her past. The embezzlement accusations, Richard Harding's version of events where she was the criminal, her firing, the months she'd spent homeless. Then it pivoted to insinuation and speculation, questioning how a disgraced former executive had managed to land a high-paying position with one of Chicago's wealthiest families so quickly after a chance encounter. The implication was clear without being actionable. Sophie Bennett was a con artist who'd orchestrated the entire restaurant incident to position herself near money and power. Sophie? Evelyn's voice cut through the static in her head. What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Sophie handed over her phone without speaking. Watched Evelyn's expression shift from concern to anger as she read. This is Victoria's doing, Evelyn said flatly. Her lawyers must have hired someone to dig into your background. They didn't have to dig very hard. It's all public record. Sophie's voice sounded distant to her own ears. Everyone already knew about Richard, about what happened. This just connects the dots in the worst possible way. The dots they're connecting are lies. Are they, though? Sophie stood up, pacing to the window. Think about it from the outside. Disgraced ex-corporate strategist happens to be serving the table where a billionaire's mother is being abused. Makes the call that gets the wife arrested. Within 2 weeks, she's working for the family at a salary way above her qualifications. It looks exactly like what they're saying it looks like. You're saying you planned this? Evelyn's voice was sharp. That you somehow knew I'd be at that restaurant, knew what Victoria was doing, knew I'd slip you a note? No. But that's not how it's going to sound to everyone else. Sophie turned back to face her. I told you hiring me would bring my past into your life. I warned you this would happen. And I told you I didn't care. You should care. Because this is just the beginning. Sophie's phone was already buzzing with more notifications. The story spreading, being picked up by other outlets, her face appearing on gossip sites and social media. Victoria's lawyers are smart. They can't prove I orchestrated anything, so they're just raising questions, making people wonder, destroying my credibility before I can be a credible witness against her. The office door opened and Ethan walked in, his phone already in his hand, his expression thunderous. Have you seen this garbage? Just read it, Evelyn said. My lawyers are drafting a response. We'll threaten defamation suits against every outlet that ran it. He looked at Sophie. We'll bury them. You can't bury the truth, Sophie said quietly. Everything they wrote about my past is accurate. The only part that's speculation is my motives, and you can't sue someone for asking questions. So we let them destroy you? They already destroyed me once. I survived. She picked up her bag, suddenly needing to be anywhere but this beautiful office in this beautiful house where she didn't belong. I need some air. I'll be back this afternoon. Sophie, Evelyn started. Please, just give me a few hours. She left before either of them could argue, taking the back exit to avoid the security detail that had become a permanent fixture outside the house. The December cold bit through her coat as she walked without direction, just needing movement, needing distance from the catastrophe she'd apparently dragged into the Sterling family's life. Her phone kept buzzing, texts from Catherine asking if she was all right, calls from numbers she didn't recognize, probably reporters. One message from Marcus, her old coworker. Hey, saw the news. That's messed up. You okay? She was typing a response when she walked straight into someone on the sidewalk. Sorry, I wasn't... The apology died in her throat. Richard Harding stood in front of her, older than she remembered, but unmistakable. The man who'd stolen millions and blamed her for it. The man who'd smiled while he destroyed her life. He looked prosperous and confident, wearing a coat that probably cost more than her monthly salary. Sophie Bennett. His voice was smooth, pleasant even. What a coincidence. I was just reading about you. Every muscle in Sophie's body went rigid. Get away from me. Now, is that any way to greet an old friend? Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. Congratulations on your new position, by the way. Executive assistant to Evelyn Sterling. That's quite a step up from waitressing. Though I suppose when you have certain talents for positioning yourself near wealth, opportunities present themselves. You're the one who fed that story to the press. Me? I'm just a businessman who happened to give an interview when asked about a former employee's history. He stepped closer, and Sophie forced herself not to back away. I simply told the truth about what happened at my company, how you attempted to embezzle funds and frame me when you were caught. Public record, all of it. You know that's a lie. Do I? Because the courts seem to disagree. Your charges were dropped due to insufficient evidence, not innocence. There's a difference. His voice dropped lower, more intimate. You should be careful, Sophie. Powerful families don't like being associated with scandal, and you seem to bring scandal wherever you go. Is that a threat? It's friendly advice from someone who knows how the world works. Richard straightened his coat. Enjoy your new position while it lasts. These things have a way of working themselves out. He walked away before Sophie could respond, leaving her standing on the sidewalk with her heart hammering and her hands shaking with rage she couldn't afford to express. She made it 2 more blocks before her phone rang. "Ethan, where are you?" "Walking, thinking." Sophie's voice came out steadier than she felt. "I need you to come back to the house, now." "What happened?" "Just come back, please." The urgency in his voice pulled her around. She caught a cab, splurging on the fare because her legs suddenly didn't feel steady enough for the walk back, and made it to the Sterling residence in 15 minutes. Catherine met her at the door, her usually composed face tight with stress. "Conference room, they're waiting for you." The conference room turned out to be a formal space Sophie had only seen in passing. Long table, leather chairs, walls lined with what were probably original paintings. Ethan sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 people in expensive suits who had "lawyer" written all over them. Evelyn occupied a chair nearby, her expression unreadable. "Sit," Ethan said, gesturing to a chair across from him. Sophie sat. "What's going on?" The woman lawyer, 50-something, steel-gray hair, eyes like a shark, spoke first. "Miss Bennett, I'm Jennifer Hayes. I represent the Sterling family. We need to ask you some questions about your employment history and the circumstances that led to your current position." "Are you serious right now?" Sophie looked at Ethan. "You're interrogating me?" "We're protecting everyone involved," Jennifer said smoothly, "including you. Victoria Sterling's legal team has filed a motion to have the abuse charges dismissed on the grounds that the primary witness, you, is not credible due to your history of fraud allegations." "Which were false, which were never proven false. The charges against you were dropped, but no one was ever charged with framing you. Legally speaking, you're in a gray area." Jennifer pulled out a tablet and slid it across the table. "They're also alleging that you and Mr. Sterling are engaged in a relationship, and that your employment is compensation for that relationship rather than legitimate work." Sophie's face went hot. "That's insane. I barely know him." "But you've been spending significant time together. He drives you home from work several times a week. You've had dinner alone together multiple times. You're living in a building where the Sterling family pays for security." Jennifer's voice was clinical, factual. "I'm not saying I believe their narrative. I'm saying it's a narrative that could gain traction if we're not careful." "So what are you asking me?" "I'm asking if there's anything in your relationship with Mr. Sterling or Mrs. Sterling that could be construed as inappropriate. Anything that would give their lawyers ammunition." Sophie looked directly at Ethan. "You want me to answer that?" "I want you to tell the truth." His voice was tight. "Whatever it is, fine." "The truth is, I work for your mother because she offered me a job I'm qualified for and needed. The truth is, your son drives me home sometimes because he's a decent person who worries about my safety. The truth is, we've had dinner together maybe 3 times, always in public, always platonic. The truth is, if there was anything inappropriate happening, I wouldn't be stupid enough to risk the best job I've had in 3 years for it." She stood up. "Is that good enough, or should I provide character witnesses?" "Sit down, Sophie." Evelyn's voice cut through the tension. "No one's accusing you of anything." "Really? Because it feels a lot like an accusation." The male lawyer, younger, nervous-looking, cleared his throat. "We're just trying to prepare for what Victoria's team will throw at us. If there are any vulnerabilities in Miss Bennett's position or history, we need to know about them before they become public." "My vulnerabilities are already public," Sophie said, but she sat back down. "Richard Harding made sure of that 3 years ago, and apparently he's making sure of it again now." Ethan's head snapped up. "What do you mean again?" "I ran into him about an hour ago on the street. He made it very clear he was the one who gave that interview about my past." Sophie's hands clenched in her lap. "He's working with Victoria's lawyers. Has to be. The timing's too perfect." Yeah, Jennifer and her colleague exchanged looks. "That would actually help us," Jennifer said slowly. "If we can prove coordination between Harding and Victoria's legal team, we can argue the entire media campaign is a malicious prosecution tactic rather than legitimate journalism." "Great. My past trauma becomes your legal strategy." Sophie's laugh was hollow. "Sophie," Ethan's voice was softer now, "we're not trying to use you. We're trying to protect you. By questioning whether I'm sleeping with you? By preparing for every angle Victoria's team might exploit." He ran his hand through his hair, exhaustion showing through the CEO veneer. I'm sorry, it's a mess, but we need to be ready for whatever comes next. What came next arrived the following morning in the form of another article, this one more explicitly accusatory. Anonymous sources claimed Sophie had been seen entering and leaving Ethan Sterling's private residence at odd hours, that she'd been spotted having intimate dinners with him while his divorce was pending, that Evelyn Sterling's hiring of her assistant was actually a cover for an affair between Sophie and Ethan. The comment section was predictably vicious: gold digger, home wrecker, opportunist. Women who looked like Sophie didn't land men like Ethan Sterling without ulterior motives, according to the internet experts on such matters. Sophie read it all while sitting in Evelyn's office, her coffee going cold beside her, and felt the careful life she'd rebuilt crumbling again. Stop reading that garbage. Evelyn took the phone out of Sophie's hands. It's designed to hurt you. Don't give it the power. It's working though, isn't it? People believe it. They want to believe it. Sophie's voice cracked. Poor girl makes good by seducing rich man. It's a better story than Waitress makes phone call and gets lucky. Is that what you think this is? Luck? What else would you call it? Right place, right time, right desperate old woman who needed help. Sophie immediately regretted the words. I'm sorry, I didn't mean… Yes, you did. And you're not entirely wrong. Evelyn settled into the chair across from her. But you're also not entirely right. Yes, you were in the right place at the right time. But thousands of people saw me that night, Sophie. Thousands of people have seen abused women and looked away because it was easier. You didn't. That's not luck. That's character. Character doesn't pay legal bills when Victoria's lawyers come after me for defamation. No, but my lawyers do, and Ethan's do, and we're not going to let them destroy you. Evelyn leaned forward. I know you're scared. I know this feels like it's happening all over again, but you're not alone this time. You have resources. You have support. You have people who will fight for you. Sophie wanted to believe that, wanted to trust that this time would be different. But she'd learned the hard way that powerful people's promises had expiration dates. Her phone buzzed with a new message. Unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something made her check. Sophie Bennett? This is Amanda Chen from the Chicago Tribune. I'd like to talk to you about Richard Harding and what really happened at Hartman and Associates 3 years ago. I think your story deserves to be told properly. Call me. Sophie stared at the message, her pulse accelerating. Evelyn, if someone wanted to tell their side of a story publicly, would that be stupid or brave? Depends on the story, and the timing, and whether you have good lawyers. Evelyn's eyes sharpened. What are you thinking? I'm thinking I'm tired of other people controlling the narrative about my life. Sophie showed her the message. I'm thinking maybe it's time to stop hiding and start fighting back. That's a dangerous road. I'm already on it. Might as well choose my own direction. Evelyn studied her for a long moment, then smiled slowly. You know what? I think my son was right about you. You're a lot braver than you give yourself credit for. Sophie called Amanda Chen that afternoon and agreed to an interview for the following week. Then she called Jennifer Hayes and told her what she was planning. The lawyer's response was predictably cautious. Going public was risky, could backfire, might give Victoria's team more ammunition. But when Sophie asked point blank if she should do it, Jennifer said, if it were me, if I'd been through what you've been through and had a chance to set the record straight, yeah, I'd do it. Just make sure you're ready for the consequences. The consequences started before the interview even aired. Richard Harding's lawyers sent a cease and desist letter threatening legal action if Sophie made any defamatory statements about him or his company. Victoria's legal team filed a motion to have Sophie removed as a witness in the abuse case, citing her pattern of making false accusations against successful professionals. And someone, Sophie never found out who, leaked her current address to a gossip blog, resulting in photographers camping outside her building again. Ethan showed up at her apartment that evening without calling first. Pack a bag, he said when she opened the door. You're staying at my house. Excuse me? There are photographers outside your building. Someone leaked your address, probably the same people funding this whole smear campaign. He walked past her into the apartment without invitation. It's not safe here. So your solution is I move into your house? That'll really kill the affair rumors. I have 6 bedrooms and a full-time staff. You'll have your own floor. It's more secure than this place, and Lily's been asking about you anyway. He turned to face her. I'm not taking no for an answer, Sophie, not on this. You can't just order me around. I can when it comes to your safety. Pack, now. Sophie wanted to argue, wanted to assert her independence and refuse his help on principle, but she looked at her tiny apartment with its thin walls and single deadbolt, thought about the photographers outside and the lawyers circling and Richard Harding's smug face on the sidewalk. She packed. Ethan's house was in Lincoln Park, 3 blocks from his mother's place, a converted Victorian that managed to be both enormous and somehow homey. He showed her to a guest suite on the 3rd floor, bedroom, bathroom, sitting area, more space than her entire apartment, and told her to make herself comfortable. Lily's already asleep, but she'll be excited to see you at breakfast, he said at the door. And Sophie? Thank you for not fighting me on this. Don't get used to it. I'm still mad about the interrogation yesterday. Fair, he smiled tiredly. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be another long day. Tomorrow turned out to be worse than long. It started with Lily squealing with delight at finding Sophie at the breakfast table and ended with Victoria's lawyers releasing a statement calling Sophie a troubled individual with a documented history of making false accusations to advance her personal interests. The statement went viral within hours. Sophie's phone exploded with messages, some supportive, most hateful. Someone created a hashtag calling for her to be fired. A women's advocacy group she'd never heard of issued a statement condemning her for undermining real abuse victims with her fabricated claims. Sophie was reading that particular piece of irony when Evelyn called. Turn on Channel 7, now. Sophie grabbed the remote in the guest suite sitting room and found the local news. A carefully coiffed anchor was interviewing someone Sophie had never seen before. A woman, maybe 40, professional-looking, composed. Worked with Sophie Bennett at Hartman & Associates, the woman was saying. And I can tell you without hesitation that everything Richard Harding said about her was a lie. Sophie's breath caught. This is Jessica Moreno, the anchor said. You were an accountant at Hartman & Associates 3 years ago? Senior accountant. I'm the one who initially flagged the discrepancies in the accounts Richard Harding was managing. I brought them to Sophie because she was the only person in management I trusted. Jessica's voice was steady, clear. She did everything right, documented everything, went through proper channels, tried to protect the company. Richard destroyed her for it, and I watched it happen and said nothing because I was scared of losing my own job. Why come forward now? Because I've been watching Sophie Bennett get attacked in the press for the past week, watching people call her a liar, a con artist, someone who makes false accusations, and I can't stay silent anymore. Not when I know the truth, not when I have the documentation to prove it. The camera cut back to the anchor. We've reached out to Richard Harding and Hartman & Associates for comment. They declined to speak on camera but provided a statement calling Ms. Moreno's allegations false and defamatory. Sophie's phone rang immediately. Ethan. Are you watching this? Yeah. Sophie's voice was shaking. Who is she? I worked with a Jessica, but we weren't close. I don't understand why she'd... My lawyers found her. They've been investigating Harding like I told you. Jessica Moreno left Hartman & Associates 6 months after you did. Apparently she's been carrying guilt about not speaking up ever since. A pause. She wants to talk to you. Would you be okay with that? Yes, I want to talk to her. But Jessica Moreno came to Evelyn's office the next day, escorted by Jennifer Hayes and carrying a banker's box full of documents. She was smaller than she'd looked on TV, nervous in a way that made Sophie recognize a fellow survivor of corporate warfare. I'm sorry, Jessica said before Sophie could speak. I'm so sorry I didn't say something 3 years ago. I was scared and selfish, and I let you take the fall for exposing something I'd found. You gave me the information in the first place, Sophie said slowly, the memory coming back. The initial spreadsheet showing the discrepancies. I'd forgotten that. Because you had bigger things to worry about, like being accused of embezzlement and losing everything. Jessica set the box on Evelyn's desk. I've been documenting Richard's activities since you left. Every suspicious transaction, every account that doesn't quite add up. It's all here, and I'm ready to testify to whatever you need. Jennifer Hayes was already going through the box, her expression growing more satisfied with each page. This is good. This is really good. If even half of this holds up under investigation, Richard Harding is looking at serious federal charges. I don't want revenge, Sophie said. I just want people to stop calling me a liar. Revenge is just justice with better publicity, Evelyn said dryly. And in this case, you deserve both. The Amanda Chen interview aired that Sunday night, a full hour on a major network's news magazine program. Sophie watched it with Evelyn, Ethan, and a very sleepy Lily, who insisted on staying up past her bedtime to see Sophie on TV. She'd been terrified of how it would turn out, how she'd look, whether her words would be twisted or taken out of context. But Amanda Chen had done something Sophie hadn't expected. She'd treated the story like it mattered, like Sophie mattered, like the truth was worth more than ratings. The piece covered everything: the embezzlement at Hartman and Associates, Richard's frame job, Sophie's homelessness, her survival, the night at Marchand's, and the subsequent media assault by Victoria's legal team. It included interviews with Jessica Moreno, with Evelyn, with Marcus from the restaurant, who confirmed Sophie had always been professional and kind. And it ended with Sophie looking directly at the camera and saying, "I'm done being ashamed of surviving. I did the right thing 3 years ago, and I paid for it. I did the right thing 6 weeks ago, and I'm paying for it again, but I'd make the same choices, because some silences cost more than speaking up ever could." The social media response was immediate and divided. Half the internet called her brave. The other half called her an attention seeker. But the narrative had shifted. Questions were being asked about Richard Harding's financials, about Victoria Sterling's legal tactics, about why powerful people worked so hard to silence women who spoke up about abuse. Sophie's phone rang at 11 that night. Unknown number, but she was starting to recognize the pattern. "This is Sophie." "Miss Bennett, this is Harold Pierce from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. I'd like to speak with you about Richard Harding and Jessica Moreno's allegations. Would you be available to come in tomorrow?" Sophie looked at Evelyn, who'd been listening to the one-sided conversation with growing interest. Yes, I'll be there." When she hung up, Evelyn was smiling. "The FBI doesn't call unless they're serious. Richard Harding just made a very big mistake." "What mistake?" "Coming after you while you had allies powerful enough to make sure someone actually investigated." Evelyn raised her wine glass in a small salute. "Welcome to the part where we stop playing defense and start destroying everyone who tried to destroy you." Ethan walked into the room carrying a sleeping Lily. She made it through 40 minutes before crashing. Personal record. He looked between them. "What did I miss?" "The FBI wants to talk to Sophie about Richard Harding," Evelyn said. Something fierce and satisfied crossed Ethan's face. "Good. It's about time someone made that bastard answer for what he did." He carried Lily upstairs while Sophie and Evelyn sat in comfortable silence, watching the news coverage continue on mute. The bottom of the screen scrolled with viewer comments, some supportive, some vicious, all of them proof that Sophie's life was now irrevocably public. "Are you all right?" Evelyn asked eventually. "I don't know. Ask me after the FBI interview." Sophie set down her own wine glass, untouched. "I keep waiting for this to feel good. The truth coming out, people listening, Richard getting investigated. But mostly I just feel exhausted." "That's because you're still fighting. Vindication only feels good after the battle's over." Evelyn reached over and squeezed her hand. "But you're winning, Sophie. Slowly, painfully, but winning. And that's more than most people in your position ever get. What if it's not enough? What if Richard's lawyers are better, or the FBI decides there's not enough evidence, or Victoria's team finds some new way to—" "Then we fight harder. That's what you do when you have people on your side." Evelyn's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "You're not alone this time. Remember that." Ethan came back downstairs and poured himself a whiskey, settling into the chair across from them. "My lawyer called while I was putting Lily down. Victoria's team is requesting an emergency hearing about the restraining order. They want it lifted." "Absolutely not," Evelyn said immediately. "That's what I told Jennifer. But they're claiming the media coverage has been prejudicial, that I've used my influence to wage a public campaign against my wife, that she deserves the right to defend herself." He took a long drink. "It's not going to work, but it's going to be ugly." "It's already ugly," Sophie pointed out. "It's going to get worse before it gets better. Victoria's desperate, and desperate people do desperate things." Ethan looked at Sophie. "I'm sorry you got dragged into this. You saved my mother and ended up in the middle of my divorce war. I made choices. I'm living with consequences. Sophie stood up, suddenly too tired to maintain the conversation. I'm going to bed. Long day tomorrow with the FBI and everything. She made it to the stairs before Ethan called her name. Sophie, that thing you said in the interview about some silences costing more than speaking up, you meant that? Every word. Good. Because that's the woman I want working for my mother. The one who speaks up even when it's hard. Don't lose that. Sophie climbed the stairs to her borrowed bedroom in her borrowed life, thinking about silence and speaking up and all the ways courage looked different than she'd expected. She'd thought bravery was about not being afraid. But maybe it was about being terrified and doing the thing anyway. About standing up even when you knew you'd probably get knocked down. She fell asleep still dressed, too exhausted to change, and dreamed about courtrooms and cameras and a version of herself who wasn't afraid anymore. The version she was trying to become. The FBI interview took 4 hours and left Sophie feeling like she'd been turned inside out. Special Agent Harold Pierce was methodical and thorough, walking her through every detail of her time at Hartman and Associates, every conversation with Richard Harding, every document she'd signed or flagged or questioned. Jennifer Hayes sat beside Sophie the entire time, occasionally interjecting when questions veered too close to speculation, but mostly letting Sophie tell the story in her own words. By the time they finished, Sophie's throat was raw, and her hands ached from clenching them in her lap. Thank you for your cooperation, Miss Bennett, Pierce said, closing his notebook. We'll be in touch if we need anything else. In the meantime, I'd advise you not to discuss the details of this interview with anyone outside your legal counsel. Does that mean you're actually investigating him? Sophie asked. Pierce's expression didn't change. It means we're doing our due diligence. That's all I can say right now. It wasn't the reassurance Sophie had been hoping for, but it was something. She left the federal building with Jennifer, both of them silent until they reached the car. How do you think it went? Sophie asked. Better than I expected. You were clear, consistent, and you didn't embellish. That matters. Jennifer started the engine. Pierce wouldn't have spent 4 hours with you if they weren't taking this seriously. FBI doesn't waste time on fishing expeditions. So what happens now? Now we wait, and we prepare for Victoria's emergency hearing tomorrow. Jennifer glanced at her. You ready for that? Sophie thought about facing Victoria Sterling in a courtroom, about having to recount Evelyn's abuse to a judge while Victoria's lawyers tried to paint her as a liar and a homewrecker. No, but I'll do it anyway. That's the spirit, Jennifer said dryly. The hearing was scheduled for 10 the next morning. Sophie wore one of the outfits Evelyn had given her, navy suit, simple jewelry, nothing flashy, and tried not to throw up in the courthouse bathroom. Evelyn had wanted to come, but Jennifer had advised against it. Better to keep the focus on the legal issues rather than the emotional ones. Ethan had no such restrictions. He sat in the gallery directly behind Sophie, his presence solid and reassuring even when Victoria walked into the courtroom with her own battalion of lawyers. Sophie hadn't seen Victoria since the restaurant. The woman looked different now, thinner, harder. Her beauty turned sharp and brittle. When her eyes landed on Sophie, the hatred there was so pure and focused it felt physical. All rise, the bailiff called, and Judge Patricia Morrison entered. A black woman in her 60s with silver hair and an expression that suggested she'd heard every possible variation of bullshit and wasn't interested in hearing more. Victoria's lead attorney, a slick man named Douglas Brennan, who probably charged more per hour than Sophie made in a week, started with a motion to dismiss the restraining order. Your Honor, my client has been subjected to a coordinated media campaign designed to prejudice public opinion against her. Her husband has used his considerable wealth and influence to paint her as an abuser based solely on the uncorroborated testimony of a single witness with a documented history of making false accusations. Jennifer was on her feet immediately. Objection. Miss Bennett's past allegations were never proven false, and the abuse against Mrs. Sterling was documented by medical professionals and police officers who witnessed the injuries firsthand. Injuries that could have been sustained in any number of ways, Brennan shot back. My client maintains that Mrs. Sterling's claims are fabricated as part of a scheme orchestrated by her son to gain sole custody of their daughter and avoid paying appropriate spousal support. Judge Morrison held up a hand. Mr. Brennan, Are you seriously arguing that a 72-year-old woman injured herself to help her son's divorce case? I'm arguing that the situation is more complex than the prosecution has portrayed, and that my client deserves the opportunity to defend herself without a restraining order that prevents her from accessing her own home and child. The arguments went back and forth for an hour. Sophie sat still and quiet, watching the legal machinery grind away at the truth, reducing Evelyn's bruises and terror to technical points and procedural arguments. She felt Ethan's presence behind her like an anchor, keeping her from floating away into the surreal absurdity of it all. Finally, Judge Morrison had had enough. Here's what I'm seeing, Mr. Brennan. I'm seeing documented injuries. I'm seeing medical reports. I'm seeing police testimony about the victim's demeanor and statements made at the scene. What I'm not seeing is any credible evidence that this was fabricated. She looked at Victoria directly. Mrs. Sterling, do you wish to address the court? Victoria stood slowly, every movement calculated for maximum effect. Your Honor, I loved my mother-in-law. I took care of her after my father-in-law passed away, welcomed her into our home, made sure she had everything she needed. The suggestion that I would hurt her is not only false, it's devastating. Her voice trembled perfectly, tears gathering in her eyes. I believe my husband has manipulated both his mother and this witness to create a narrative that serves his purposes in our divorce, and I'm being punished for it without any real evidence beyond the word of a woman who makes her living off false accusations. Sophie felt the words like slaps. Jennifer's hand on her arm was the only thing that kept her from standing up and screaming the truth. Judge Morrison's expression didn't change. Mrs. Sterling, you're aware that making false statements to this court is perjury? I'm aware, Your Honor, and I'm telling the truth. Then you won't mind if I order a full forensic investigation into the timeline of Mrs. Evelyn Sterling's injuries, the household staff's observations during the relevant period, and any security footage from the residence that might corroborate or contradict the allegations? Victoria's lawyer jumped in. Your Honor, that's an excessive intrusion into my client's privacy. Your client just claimed she's telling the truth. A forensic investigation will prove that, won't it? Morrison's smile was sharp. Motion to lift the restraining order is denied. Furthermore, I'm ordering the investigation I just outlined. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks to review the findings. Until then, Mrs. Sterling, you will maintain appropriate distance from both Evelyn Sterling and any witnesses in this case. That includes Miss Bennett. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor. Victoria's voice was ice. Good. We're adjourned. Sophie made it out of the courtroom before her legs gave out. She caught herself against the hallway wall, breathing hard, while Ethan and Jennifer flanked her protectively. You okay? Ethan asked. She looked right at me and lied. Just stood there and lied like it was nothing. Sophie's voice shook. How do people do that? How do they just destroy the truth and not even flinch? Practice, Jennifer said grimly. Victoria's been lying her whole life. She's good at it. But the judge didn't believe her, Ethan pointed out. And now there's going to be a real investigation. The staff saw things, Sophie. The housekeeper, the cook, even the gardener noticed changes in my mother's behavior. They'll talk now that there's legal protection. And if they don't, if Victoria's scared them into silence or paid them off, then we fight harder. Ethan's voice was steel. But we don't give up, not now. The investigation Judge Morrison ordered turned out to be more thorough than any of them expected. Over the next week, investigators interviewed 14 members of the Sterling household staff, reviewed 6 months of security footage, and compiled medical records documenting Evelyn's injuries and the timeline of their appearance. Sophie watched it unfold from her position at Evelyn's side, still doing her job even as the world exploded around them. She managed Evelyn's calendar, fielded calls from board members who wanted to express support or concern, and tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. But normal was a distant memory. The press had turned the Sterling divorce into a spectator sport, with Sophie cast as either villain or hero depending on which outlet you read. Her face was everywhere: news sites, gossip blogs, even a satirical late-night sketch that made her want to crawl into a hole and never emerge. The only bright spot was Lily. The 5-year-old had decided Sophie was her new favorite person and demanded her presence at every meal, every bedtime story, every moment of her small world. Sophie found herself reading picture books about princesses and dragons, helping with kindergarten homework, and learning that sometimes the best way to forget about legal battles and media circuses was to focus on whether a purple crayon or a blue crayon was better for coloring the sky. "You're good with her," Ethan said one evening, finding Sophie in Lily's room after the girl had finally fallen asleep. "She doesn't warm up to people easily, but she trusts you. She's a good kid. You're doing something right. I'm terrified I'm doing everything wrong." Ethan sat down on the edge of Lily's bed, looking at his sleeping daughter with an expression Sophie had learned to recognize: love mixed with fear, mixed with exhaustion. "She keeps asking when Mommy's coming home, and I don't know how to tell her that Mommy might not come home, that Mommy hurt Grandma, that everything she thought was true about our family was a lie." "You tell her the truth, age-appropriate truth, but truth." Sophie kept her voice low. "Kids know when you're lying. It makes them feel crazy. Like you felt crazy when your dad was hitting your mom and everyone pretended it wasn't happening?" Sophie nodded. "Exactly like that." They sat in silence for a moment, watching Lily sleep, both of them thinking about the different ways families could break and the scars it left behind. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said finally. "Depends on the question. The night we met, in the restaurant, you said you'd survived something that destroyed you. Did you ever think you'd get past it? Or were you just going through the motions?" Sophie considered the question carefully. "Both, I think. Some days I believed I'd rebuild my life. Other days I just focused on making it through the next hour without falling apart. I didn't know which version of the future I'd get. And now? Which version did you get?" "Still figuring that out." She looked at him. "Ask me after all this is over, after the investigations and the hearings and the moment when we either win or lose. Then I'll know whether I rebuilt something or just found a fancier way to survive." The answer came faster than either of them expected. 3 days later, Jennifer Hayes called an emergency meeting at her office. Sophie, Ethan, and Evelyn gathered in the conference room where Sophie had been interrogated weeks earlier, but Jennifer's expression was different now, triumphant. "The investigative report came back," she said without preamble, sliding a thick folder across the table. "And it's damning. 7 staff members confirmed witnessing Victoria verbally abusing Evelyn. 3 witnessed physical altercations. The security footage shows Victoria entering Evelyn's room multiple times when she claimed to have been elsewhere, and the medical timeline matches Evelyn's account perfectly." "So we have her," Ethan said. "We have her. The prosecutor is upgrading the charges to aggravated domestic battery. With this evidence, Victoria is looking at real prison time." Jennifer's smile was sharp. "Her lawyers know it too. They've already reached out about a plea deal." Evelyn, who'd been silent throughout the meeting, finally spoke. "What kind of deal?" "Reduced charges in exchange for a guilty plea, no jail time but substantial probation, mandatory anger management and counseling, and she drops all claims in the divorce except basic visitation with Lily." Jennifer looked at Ethan. "It's a good deal for us. Guarantees a conviction without the trauma of a trial, protects Lily from having to potentially testify, and gets Victoria out of your lives with minimal continued contact." "What does she get out of it?" Sophie asked. "She avoids prison, keeps some dignity, maintains the fiction that this was a mental health issue rather than deliberate cruelty." Jennifer's expression hardened. "Personally, I'd rather see her do time. But strategically, this is the smart play." Ethan looked at his mother. "It's your call, Mom. She hurt you. You get to decide how this ends." Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her water glass. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. "I want it over. I want her gone. I want my son and granddaughter to have peace." She met Jennifer's eyes. "Accept the deal. But I want one more thing." "What's that?" "I want a formal apology. In writing, acknowledging what she did and the harm it caused. Not for the courts, for me. So I know she had to face the truth at least once." Jennifer made a note. "I'll make it part of the agreement." The plea deal was finalized within 48 hours. Victoria Sterling pled guilty to domestic battery, received 2 years probation, and issued a formal apology that her lawyers had probably written but she'd had to sign. The divorce settlement gave Ethan primary custody of Lily with supervised visitation for Victoria, and enough money to keep her comfortable but not extravagant. The media covered it all breathlessly. Some outlets praised the outcome as justice served. Others complained about wealthy people buying their way out of consequences. Sophie tried not to read any of it, but she couldn't avoid the inevitable press conference. Jennifer had arranged it carefully. Ethan and Evelyn standing together, Sophie slightly to the side, all of them presenting a united front. The goal was simple: take control of the narrative one final time before moving on with their lives. The reporters gathered like sharks sensing blood, cameras clicking, questions overlapping. Jennifer stepped up to the microphone first. I'm going to read a brief statement, and then we'll take limited questions. 3 weeks ago, Victoria Sterling pled guilty to domestic battery against Evelyn Sterling. This outcome was possible because someone saw abuse happening and chose to speak up, even knowing it might cost her everything. That person was Sophie Bennett. Every camera swung toward Sophie. She forced herself not to flinch. Jennifer continued. Miss Bennett has been subjected to a coordinated smear campaign designed to destroy her credibility and silence her testimony. Her past was weaponized against her. Her character was assassinated in the press. She was accused of everything from fraud to gold digging to orchestrating an elaborate scheme for personal gain. None of it was true. All of it was designed to protect an abuser. Evelyn stepped forward next, her voice carrying clearly despite her age. Sophie Bennett saved my life. That's not hyperbole. That's fact. Without her intervention, I would have continued suffering in silence, too ashamed and frightened to ask for help. She risked her job, her safety, and her reputation to help a stranger. And for that act of courage, she's been punished relentlessly. Today, I want to correct the record, Evelyn continued. Sophie Bennett is not a con artist. She's not a gold digger. She's not any of the vicious things she's been called. She's a woman who survived being betrayed by someone she trusted, who lost everything through no fault of her own, and who still chose to help someone else when she saw abuse happening. That's not a scandal. That's heroism. Ethan spoke last. My family owes Sophie Bennett a debt we can never fully repay. She exposed the abuse my mother was suffering. She stood as a witness even when powerful people tried to silence her. And she's shown my daughter what real courage looks like. He looked directly at the cameras. The people who tried to destroy Sophie Bennett's reputation did so to protect an abuser and discredit a witness. They failed. Justice was served, and Sophie Bennett deserves an apology from everyone who believed the lies. The questions came immediately, a cacophony of voices demanding details and sound bites. Jennifer fielded them with practiced efficiency, but one reporter's question cut through the noise. Miss Bennett, you've been accused of having an inappropriate relationship with Ethan Sterling. Do you have a response to those allegations? Sophie felt Ethan tense beside her, but she stepped forward before he could intervene. Yes, I have a response. Her voice was steadier than she felt. Ethan Sterling is my employer's son. That's it. The suggestion that I orchestrated this situation to seduce him or gain access to his wealth is insulting not just to me, but to every woman who's ever reported abuse and been accused of having ulterior motives. It's a tactic designed to silence victims and witnesses by making them defend their personal lives instead of focusing on the actual crime. But you are living in his house because reporters leaked my address and I was being harassed, because I needed security that I couldn't afford on my own, because sometimes accepting help isn't manipulation, it's survival. Sophie's hands were shaking, but her voice stayed firm. I'm done defending myself against made-up scandals. I did the right thing. That's all that matters. She stepped back from the microphone, and Jennifer smoothly closed out the press conference before more questions could be asked. As they walked back into the building, away from the cameras and the shouting reporters, Sophie felt something inside her finally settle. She'd told the truth, publicly, clearly, without apology or hesitation. And whether the internet believed her or not, whether the gossip sites accepted it or not, she knew she'd done everything she could. The rest was just noise. That night, Evelyn insisted on a celebratory dinner, just family, she said, which apparently now included Sophie. They gathered in the dining room of Ethan's house, the formal space made warmer by Lily's presence and Evelyn's laughter, and the sense that maybe, finally, the worst was behind them. I have an announcement, Evelyn said over dessert. Sophie, I'm promoting you. Sophie nearly choked on her wine. What? You've been managing my affairs beautifully, but I think we both know you're capable of much more. I want you to take over as director of the Sterling Foundation. Full authority over grant decisions, program development, and strategic planning. Evelyn, I don't have experience running a foundation. You have experience surviving systems designed to destroy people. You understand what it's like to need help and have nowhere to turn. You know how to fight through bureaucracy and politics to get things done. Evelyn's eyes were bright. I can teach you the technical aspects. What I can't teach is the empathy and determination you already have. That's what the foundation needs. What about your current director? Martin is retiring. He's been wanting to for years, but stayed on because I asked him to. Now I'm asking him to train you instead. Evelyn leaned forward. Say yes, Sophie. Help me build something that actually helps people instead of just making wealthy donors feel good about themselves. Sophie looked at Ethan, who was smiling slightly, and at Lily, who was more interested in her ice cream than adult conversation, and at Evelyn, who was offering her not just a job, but a purpose. Okay, she said. Yes, I'll do it. Evelyn's smile was radiant. Good. We start Monday. I want to triple our domestic violence support funding and create a new program for women rebuilding their lives after professional sabotage. I'm thinking we call it the Second Chances Initiative. Subtle, Sophie said dryly. I'm 72 years old and I just sent my abusive daughter-in-law to probation. I've earned the right not to be subtle. They were still laughing when Sophie's phone buzzed with a news alert. She glanced at it automatically, then went still. What is it? Ethan asked. Richard Harding was just arrested. Federal charges for embezzlement and wire fraud. Sophie read the details with growing disbelief. They're saying he stole over $15 million across a 7-year period. They found the accounts, the paper trail, everything. The table went silent. Then Evelyn raised her wine glass. To justice. However long it takes to arrive. They all drank to that, even Lily with her glass of milk, not understanding the significance but happy to be included. Later, after Lily had been put to bed and Evelyn had retired to her own room, Sophie and Ethan stood in the kitchen cleaning up the dinner dishes. It was domestic and comfortable and strange, given everything that had happened to bring them to this moment. Your mother's offer, Sophie said, scrubbing a plate with more force than necessary. That's a huge responsibility. You can handle it. You don't know that. Yes, I do. I've watched you manage my mother's life for 2 months while fighting off lawyers and reporters and your own past trauma. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met. He took the plate from her hands and set it in the dishwasher. The question isn't whether you can do it, it's whether you want to. I want to, Sophie admitted, but I'm scared I'll mess it up, that I'll let her down. Then you'll fix it. That's what people do. They mess up and fix it and keep trying. He paused, then added, for what it's worth, I think you're going to be amazing at this. Sophie looked at him, really looked, saw the exhaustion around his eyes from weeks of legal battles and single parenting, saw the way his shoulders carried weight he couldn't put down, saw a man who'd had his life rearranged by violence he should have seen coming and was still trying to do right by everyone around him. Can I ask you something? She said. Always. At the press conference, when that reporter asked about us, about inappropriate relationships, you looked like you wanted to punch someone. I did want to punch someone. Several someones. His jaw tightened. I hated that they made you defend yourself against something that never happened, that they turned you helping my mother into some kind of calculated seduction. It bothered you that much? Yes, because you deserve better than to have your motives questioned constantly, because you've been through enough without people inventing scandals. He met her eyes. And because if something were happening between us, I'd want it to be real. Not something you felt pressured into or obligated toward, and every time someone suggests you're only here because you're trying to trap me or use me, it makes that possibility more complicated. Sophie's breath caught. What possibility? The one where once all this is over and you're settled into the foundation and Lily's adjusted and my divorce is finalized and we're both not constantly in crisis mode. He stopped, started again. The possibility that you and I might figure out if there's something here worth exploring beyond employer's son and employee. Ethan, I know. The timing's terrible. The circumstances are worse. And I'm not asking you to decide anything now. He turned back to the dishes. I'm just saying that when people accuse you of having ulterior motives for being around me, they're wrong. But they're not entirely wrong about there being something between us, at least not from my side. Sophie didn't know what to say to that. didn't know how to process the idea that this man, this brilliant, wealthy, complicated man whose life she'd stumbled into by accident, might actually care about her as more than just the person who'd saved his mother. "Ask me again in 6 months," she said finally. "When the dust settles and we're both thinking clearly and the internet has moved on to the next scandal. Ask me then." 6 months, Ethan agreed. "I can wait 6 months." They finished the dishes in silence that felt less comfortable now, charged with possibility and promise and all the things neither of them were ready to name. When Sophie finally went up to her room, she stood at the window looking out at Chicago's lights and thought about futures. 6 months ago, she'd been invisible, broken, barely surviving. Now she was the director of a major foundation, living in a billionaire's house, helping raise a 5-year-old girl who called her Sophie Bear and demanded bedtime stories, planning programs to help women rebuild their lives the way she'd rebuilt her own. Now she had people who fought for her instead of against her, had lawyers who defended her instead of destroying her, had a family, not hers by blood, but hers nonetheless, who'd made space for her at their table and in their lives. And maybe, possibly, in 6 months when everything calmed down, she'd have something else too. Something that looked like love if she was brave enough to reach for it. But that was a problem for future Sophie. Present Sophie just stood at the window and let herself feel grateful for surviving long enough to see this moment. Grateful for the courage that had made her call 911 on a November night that changed everything. Grateful for the choice to speak up instead of staying silent. Some things were worth the risk. Some silences cost more than speaking up ever could. And sometimes, when you were very lucky, bravery brought you more than just survival. Sometimes it brought you home. 6 months turned out to be optimistic. The Sterling Foundation's transition didn't happen overnight, and Sophie quickly discovered that running a multi-million-dollar philanthropic organization was less about grand gestures and more about navigating endless meetings with lawyers, accountants, and board members who all had opinions about how things should be done. Martin Chen, the outgoing director, was patient with her stumbling and generous with his knowledge, but even he couldn't prepare her for the sheer complexity of managing grant applications, donor relations, and the politics of Chicago's nonprofit world. "You're doing fine," he told her 3 months into the transition, when Sophie had just emerged from a particularly brutal board meeting where a silver-haired trustee named Gerald had questioned every single one of her proposed changes. "Gerald questioned my decisions for 15 years. He'll question yours for 15 more. It's what he does. He called my Second Chances initiative well-intentioned but naive," Sophie said, still stinging from the dismissal. "He called my literacy program throwing money at a symptom. You get used to it." Martin smiled. "The difference is, you're not backing down. Most people in your position would have deferred to Gerald's experience by now. You're fighting for what you believe in. That's exactly what this foundation needs." Sophie wasn't sure she agreed, but she kept fighting anyway. She expanded the domestic violence support program like Evelyn wanted, tripling the funding and creating partnerships with shelters across the city. She launched the Second Chances initiative despite Gerald's objections, creating a program that provided job training, legal assistance, and financial support for women rebuilding their lives after professional sabotage. The first grant went to Jessica Moreno, who'd lost her job at Hartman and Associates shortly after testifying against Richard Harding. Jessica used the money to go back to school for forensic accounting, determined to help catch the next Richard Harding before he could destroy another Sophie Bennett. "This program saved my life," Jessica told Sophie over coffee 4 months into the initiative. "I thought I was done, blacklisted. No one would hire me after I testified. Then you called. You saved mine first," Sophie reminded her. "When you came forward, when you backed up my story." "We saved each other. That's how this works, right? Women helping women climb out of the holes men dig for us." Sophie thought about that conversation a lot in the following weeks. Thought about how much of her survival had depended on other people's courage. Evelyn passing her that note, Jessica coming forward, Evelyn offering her the job, Ethan standing beside her at the press conference. She'd spent 3 years thinking strength meant standing alone, but maybe real strength was knowing when to reach for help and being brave enough to offer it when someone else was drowning. Richard Harding's trial happened in April, 7 months after Sophie had called 911 in a restaurant and changed everything. She attended every day of it, sitting in the gallery with Jessica and watching the man who destroyed her life get picked apart by federal prosecutors who'd built an airtight case. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, testimony from other former employees, emails where Richard had joked about his creative accounting. His lawyers tried to argue that he'd been set up, that the evidence was fabricated, that Sophie Bennett and Jessica Moreno had orchestrated an elaborate frame job out of revenge. It didn't work. The jury took 4 hours to convict him on all counts. When the verdict was read, Sophie didn't feel the vindication she'd expected, just tired relief that it was finally over, that the truth had finally caught up to the lies. Richard was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and ordered to pay back everything he'd stolen. Sophie would never see a penny of it. The money would go to the company and the investors he'd defrauded. But she didn't care about the money. She cared that he'd been stopped, that he couldn't do to anyone else what he'd done to her. "How does it feel?" Ethan asked that night, finding Sophie in the foundation office where she'd retreated after the sentencing. "Justice finally served?" "Exhausting," Sophie admitted. "Is that wrong? Shouldn't I be celebrating? You've spent 3 years fighting just to be believed. Now you can stop fighting and start living." He sat down across from her desk. "That's probably terrifying in its own way." He wasn't wrong. Sophie had gotten so used to crisis mode, to defending herself, to proving herself, to constantly watching for the next attack, that peace felt foreign and slightly dangerous, like something that could be taken away at any moment. "Your mother wants to do a press release about the verdict," Sophie said, changing the subject. "Tie it to the Second Chances initiative. Show that justice is possible." "What do you want to do?" "I want to never see my name in the news again. I want to do my job without people Googling my past. I want to be boring." Sophie laughed shakily. "Is that allowed? Can I just be boring now?" "You're running a foundation that's already helped 40 women rebuild their lives. You're mentoring Lily through her parents' divorce. You're teaching my mother how to use Instagram so she can promote the foundation's work." Ethan's smile was warm. "That's not boring, Sophie. That's just life. The good kind." Life. The good kind. Sophie tested the phrase in her mind and found it almost fit. The divorce was finalized in May. Victoria signed the papers without contest, her guilty plea having stripped away any leverage she might have had. She got supervised visitation with Lily twice a month and enough money to live comfortably, if not extravagantly. Ethan got primary custody, the house, and the peace of mind that came from knowing his daughter was safe. Lily took it harder than Sophie expected. The 6-year-old couldn't quite understand why Mommy didn't live with them anymore, why visits happened in a cold office with a social worker present, why everything had changed so completely. "I miss her," Lily told Sophie one night during bedtime stories, her small voice breaking, "even though she was mean to Grandma. I still miss her sometimes. Is that bad?" Sophie set down the book and pulled Lily into her lap. "No, sweetie, that's not bad. That's just how feelings work. You can miss someone and still know they did something wrong. Both things can be true." "Do you miss people who were mean to you?" The question hit harder than it should have. Sophie thought about Richard, about her ex-fiancé who'd believed the lies and left her, about all the people who'd chosen comfortable lies over uncomfortable truth. "Sometimes," she admitted, "not because I want them back, just because I miss who I thought they were before I knew the truth." "That's sad." "Yeah, but you know what's not sad? All the people who stayed, your dad and Grandma and me. We're not going anywhere." Lily twisted around to look at her with those serious dark eyes. "Promise?" "Promise." It was a promise Sophie had no right to make. Not really. Not when she was still technically just an employee, still living in the guest room of Ethan's house because finding her own place had somehow kept getting postponed. But she meant it anyway. Somewhere along the way, this had stopped being temporary. This family, this life, this purpose. It had become real. The 6-month deadline Ethan had set came and went without acknowledgement. They were both too busy, him with work and custody arrangements, her with the foundation, and Lily's increasingly complex emotional needs. The moment never felt right to revisit that conversation in the kitchen about possibilities and futures. Until it did. It was a Saturday in late June, unseasonably cool for Chicago's summer. Lily was at a supervised visit with Victoria. Evelyn had gone to visit old friends in the suburbs, and Sophie was in the foundation office trying to finish a grant proposal that was due Monday. She was so focused on the work that she didn't hear Ethan come in until he spoke. You know it's the weekend, right? You're allowed to stop working. Sophie looked up, startled. I could say the same to you. Shouldn't you be golfing or whatever billionaires do on Saturdays? I don't golf, too boring. He walked over to her desk, casual in jeans and a t-shirt, looking more relaxed than she'd seen him in months. Come on, I want to show you something. I really need to finish this. It can wait until Monday. This can't. He held out his hand. Trust me? Sophie looked at the grant proposal, at the deadline looming, at all the very good reasons she should stay exactly where she was and keep working. Then she looked at Ethan's outstretched hand and the slight nervousness in his eyes that suggested whatever this was mattered to him. She took his hand. He drove them to the waterfront, parking near a section of the lakefront trail that Sophie had never explored. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, just enjoying the breeze off Lake Michigan and the rare quiet of the city on a lazy Saturday. You've been here almost 8 months now, Ethan said eventually. Working for my mother, living in my house, helping raise my daughter. Yeah, I know. Sophie's stomach tightened. Is this the part where you tell me it's time to move out? Because I've been looking at apartments, I just haven't found anything that... No, this is the part where I tell you I don't want you to move out. He stopped walking and turned to face her. 8 months ago, you asked me to wait 6 months before asking about the possibility of us. I waited. Then I waited some more because the timing was terrible and you were dealing with Richard's trial, and I was finalizing the divorce. But the waiting's killing me, Sophie, so I'm asking now. Is there an us? Could there be? Sophie's heart hammered against her ribs. Ethan, I know all the reasons this is complicated. I know you work for my mother, that you live in my house, that you help take care of my daughter. I know people will say you planned this, that you're using me, that it's inappropriate. His voice was steady despite the intensity in his eyes. I know all that, but I also know that I wake up every morning hoping you'll be at breakfast, that I look for excuses to drive you places just to spend more time together, that Lily lights up when you're around and my mother trusts you more than anyone except me, that when I think about my future, you're in it. Not as my mother's employee or my daughter's caretaker, just you, as yourself. We barely know each other, Sophie said weakly. We've lived in the same house for 8 months. We've survived legal battles and media circuses and family trauma together. I know how you take your coffee and what makes you laugh, and how you get quiet when you're overwhelmed. I know you're terrified of failing people and that you double-check locks 3 times before bed and that you cry at children's books when you think no one's watching. He stepped closer. Maybe we haven't had traditional dates or normal circumstances. But I know you, Sophie, and I'm asking if you want to know me too. For real this time. Not as employer's son or fellow survivor, just as people who might love each other if we're brave enough to try. Sophie couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Could only feel the weight of everything he was offering and everything it would mean to accept. I'm scared, she whispered. Me too. What if it doesn't work? What if we ruin what we have? What if it does work? What if we spend the rest of our lives wondering what we could have been because we were too scared to find out? His hand came up to cup her face gently. I'm not saying it'll be easy. I'm not promising perfect. I'm just saying I want to try. With you. If you want to try with me. Sophie thought about the woman she'd been 8 months ago. Invisible, broken, barely surviving. She thought about all the ways she'd rebuilt herself, all the risks she'd taken, all the moments she'd chosen courage over comfort. She thought about Lily calling her Sophie Bear, and Evelyn trusting her with the foundation, and this man standing in front of her offering something she'd never thought she'd have again. A future. A real one. Not borrowed or temporary or contingent on staying invisible. Okay? She said. Yes. Let's try. The kiss was tentative at first, both of them nervous and careful and afraid of breaking something fragile. But then Ethan's arms came around her and Sophie let herself lean into it, into him, into the possibility of something that felt like it might actually last. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Ethan was smiling. So, now what? Now we figure it out as we go, like everything else. Sophie laughed shakily. And we probably need to tell your mother before she finds out some other way and kills us both. She already knows. What? She's known for months. Keeps asking me when I'm going to stop being an idiot and tell you how I feel. Ethan grinned. My mother's not subtle about these things. They walked back to the car hand in hand, and Sophie felt something shift inside her. Like a door she'd kept locked for 3 years finally opening. Like possibility finally outweighing fear. Evelyn's reaction when they told her that evening was predictably smug. Finally. I was beginning to think I'd have to meddle more obviously. You were meddling? Sophie asked. Of course I was meddling. Why do you think I kept sending you two on errands together? Why do you think I conveniently needed to visit friends every time Lily had a playdate? Evelyn's smile was pure satisfaction. I'm 72 years old, and I survived an abusive daughter-in-law. I've earned the right to meddle in my son's love life. Lily, who'd been listening to this conversation with 6-year-old intensity, looked between Sophie and her father with wide eyes. Does this mean Sophie's going to be my new mommy? The room went silent. Ethan looked panicked, Evelyn looked delighted, and Sophie felt her heart skip several beats. No, sweetie, Sophie said carefully, kneeling down to Lily's level. Your daddy and I are going to spend time together and see if we want to be together, like boyfriend and girlfriend. But you already have a mommy. That doesn't change. But you could be like a bonus person, like grandma's a bonus grandma because she's daddy's mom and not mommy's mom? Sophie glanced at Ethan, who looked like he was trying not to cry. Yeah, I could be like a bonus person, if that's okay with you. Lily thought about this seriously, then nodded. Okay, but you have to keep reading me stories, and helping with my homework, and making the pancakes on Sunday because Daddy burns them. I do not burn them, Ethan protested. You do, Evelyn and Sophie said in unison, then looked at each other and laughed. The next few months weren't perfect. They had their first fight 3 weeks into officially dating when Sophie accused Ethan of treating her like she needed protection instead of partnership, and he accused her of pushing him away every time things got too comfortable. They worked through it awkwardly, both of them learning how to be in a relationship again after everything they'd been through. The press inevitably found out, and the gossip cycle started up again. More speculation about gold digging and inappropriate relationships, and whether Sophie Bennett had been playing a long game all along. But this time, Sophie barely flinched. She'd learned that people would think what they wanted regardless of the truth, and she was done trying to control narratives she couldn't control. The Second Chances initiative grew faster than Sophie had expected. By the end of the year, they'd helped over 100 women, providing job training, legal support, housing assistance, and mentorship to women who'd been sabotaged, fired, or blacklisted by vindictive employers or partners. Sophie hired Jessica Moreno as the program's assistant director, and together they built something that actually made a difference. Victoria continued her supervised visits with Lily, slowly and carefully rebuilding a relationship with her daughter that would never be what it was, but might eventually be something healthier. Sophie stayed carefully out of those visits, respecting boundaries while also protecting Lily when she came home confused or sad. Richard Harding served his sentence without fanfare. Sophie stopped following the news about him after the first year. He'd taken enough of her life already. She wasn't giving him any more. And through it all, Sophie and Ethan figured out how to build something real. Date nights when they could find babysitters, family dinners with Evelyn and Lily, quiet mornings before Lily woke up, drinking coffee and talking about their days, learning each other's rhythms and wounds and hopes. It wasn't always easy. Sophie still had nightmares sometimes about being homeless, about losing everything again. Ethan still carried guilt about not seeing what Victoria was doing to his mother. They both had baggage and scars and broken places that didn't quite heal right, but they also had each other. And they had Evelyn, who continued to meddle cheerfully in their lives. And they had Lily, who slowly stopped asking about mommy so much and started asking if Sophie could teach her to braid hair like Sophie's. 18 months after that November night in a restaurant, Sophie stood in the Sterling Foundation office reviewing applications for the latest round of Second Chances grants. Her office now, Martin had fully retired 6 months ago, and the board had unanimously approved Sophie as the permanent director despite Gerald's token objections. She was so focused on reading about a woman who'd lost her nursing license after reporting a doctor for sexual harassment that she didn't notice Ethan come in until he cleared his throat. Busy? He asked. Always. What's up? She looked up and froze. He was holding a small velvet box. Ethan, I know this is your office. I know you're working. I know the timing's probably terrible, and I should have planned something elaborate and romantic. He walked over to her desk and set the box down carefully. But I've been carrying this around for 3 weeks trying to find the perfect moment, and I realize the perfect moment doesn't exist. There's just this moment, right now, with you looking at me like I've lost my mind. Sophie stared at the box like it might explode. What are you doing? What does it look like I'm doing? I'm asking you to marry me, probably badly, definitely without enough planning. He opened the box to reveal a ring. Simple, elegant, nothing ostentatious. Marry me, Sophie. Not because you work for my mother or live in my house or help raise my daughter. Marry me because you make me laugh when I'm tired and you call me out when I'm being an idiot and you fight for people who can't fight for themselves. Marry me because I love you. Because Lily loves you. Because my mother loves you and won't stop hinting that she wants great-grandchildren before she dies. Your mother's 74 and in perfect health. I know, but she's persistent. His smile was nervous and hopeful and entirely real. So what do you say? Want to take a chance on the billionaire whose wife you had arrested? Sophie laughed. Couldn't help it. The absurdity of everything, the journey from that restaurant to this moment, the sheer impossible probability of it all. That's your proposal? Reminding me I had your ex-wife arrested? I'm not great at this. I'm out of practice. He pulled the ring from the box. Let me try again. Sophie Bennett, you walked into my life on the worst night of it and somehow made everything better. You saved my mother. You helped my daughter heal. You taught me what real strength looks like. And I want to spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you. So will you marry me? Please? Sophie looked at the ring, at this man who'd somehow become her whole world, at the future being offered on a simple question. She thought about all the reasons to say no, the complications, the press coverage it would generate, the inevitable accusations that she'd planned this all along. Then she thought about Lily, asking if Sophie was going to keep reading her stories, about Evelyn trusting her with the foundation, about the 100 women who'd rebuilt their lives because Sophie had been brave enough to rebuild her own, about the woman she'd been 18 months ago, invisible and broken and barely surviving, and the woman she was now, seen, whole, and actually living. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. The ring slid onto her finger perfectly, and Ethan pulled her into a kiss that was interrupted almost immediately by Evelyn opening the office door. Finally! I've been waiting in the hallway for 10 minutes. She walked in without apology, beaming. Lily, you can come in now. She said yes. Lily burst through the door, followed by Catherine Walsh and Jennifer Hayes and half the foundation staff, all of them grinning like they'd been in on this the whole time. You all knew? Sophie asked, laughing and crying simultaneously. Everyone knew, Jennifer confirmed. He's been asking people for advice for weeks. It was painful to watch. I wanted it to be perfect, Ethan protested. It was perfect, Sophie said, and meant it. Not because of the ring or the surprise or the audience, but because it was real. Because after everything, the betrayal and the homelessness and the public humiliation and the slow crawl back to something resembling a life, she'd found something worth fighting for. Someone worth fighting for. A family worth believing in. The wedding happened 6 months later, small and private, despite the press's best efforts to turn it into a circus. They got married in Evelyn's garden with 50 people in attendance, close friends, foundation staff, a few board members who'd become genuine allies. Lily was the flower girl and took her job very seriously, making sure every petal was placed perfectly. Victoria had sent a card, nothing personal, just a standard congratulations, and Sophie had thrown it away without reading it. Some bridges stayed burned, and that was okay. Jessica Moreno gave a toast about second chances and women saving women. Marcus from the restaurant showed up with his new boyfriend and told embarrassing stories about Sophie's waitressing days. Evelyn cried through the whole ceremony, happy tears this time, and told everyone who'd listened that she'd known from the beginning Sophie was meant to be part of the family. And when the minister asked if Sophie Bennett took Ethan Sterling to be her lawfully wedded husband, she said yes without hesitation, without fear, without the voice in her head that had spent 3 years telling her she didn't deserve good things. Because maybe she did deserve this. Maybe survival wasn't something you had to keep proving. Maybe sometimes courage brought you more than just safety. Maybe sometimes it brought you home. 2 years later, Sophie stood in the Sterling Foundation office. now relocated to a larger space to accommodate their expanded programs, reviewing the annual report. The Second Chances Initiative had helped over 500 women in its 3 years of operation. The Domestic Violence Support Program had expanded to 12 cities. They'd launched new initiatives for job training, mental health support, and legal advocacy. The foundation had tripled its impact, and Sophie had tripled her staff. She had an actual team now, people who shared her vision of what helping people actually meant. "You look tired," Evelyn said, appearing in the doorway with her usual impeccable timing. "I am tired. We just finished the Q3 numbers, and they're good, but we need to be better if we're going to hit our goals for the year." Sophie rubbed her eyes. "Gerald's going to have opinions about the spending levels." "Gerald always has opinions. Ignore him." Evelyn settled into the chair across from Sophie's desk. "How are you feeling? Really?" "Exhausted, nauseous, like I might fall asleep standing up." Sophie smiled tiredly. "But good. Happy. Is that weird? Being tired and happy at the same time?" "That's called being alive." Evelyn's eyes were sharp with affection. "And possibly being pregnant, if my guess is correct." Sophie's hand went automatically to her stomach, where a life barely 3 months old was growing. They hadn't told anyone yet except Lily, who was thrilled at the prospect of being a big sister and kept asking when the baby would arrive so she could teach it important things like which crayons were best. "How did you know?" "You've been falling asleep at board meetings and running to the bathroom every hour. I'm old, not oblivious." Evelyn leaned forward. "How's Ethan handling it?" "Terrified, excited, overprotective. He tried to carry my laptop for me yesterday like I'd suddenly become fragile." Sophie laughed. "I had to remind him I'm pregnant, not dying. Men get weird about these things. His father tried to wrap me in bubble wrap when I was pregnant with Ethan. Drove me insane." Evelyn's smile turned sad for just a moment. She still missed her husband, even 3 years after his death, then brightened again. "Are you happy, Sophie? Really happy?" Sophie thought about the question. Thought about her life now, the job she loved, the husband who made her laugh, the stepdaughter who called her Sophie Mom as a compromise between wanting 2 mothers and respecting that Victoria was still Lily's biological mom. Thought about the baby growing inside her and the family she'd found and the purpose she'd discovered in helping other women survive what she'd survived. Thought about the woman she'd been in that restaurant 2 years ago, invisible and terrified and certain that calling 911 would destroy her. "Yeah," she said, "I'm really happy. Is that allowed after everything that happened?" "Sophie Bennett Sterling, you saved my life. You rebuilt your own life from nothing. You've helped hundreds of women do the same. You've earned the right to be happy." Evelyn's voice was firm. "Don't you dare apologize for it." Sophie didn't apologize. Instead, she finished the annual report, went home to her family, and let herself feel grateful for every choice that had led her here. The good ones and the bad ones. The brave ones and the desperate ones. The night she'd seen an old woman with bruised wrists and decided silence cost more than speaking up, because that choice had changed everything, had saved Evelyn and exposed Victoria and destroyed Richard and rebuilt Sophie, had led to love and family and purpose and a future she'd never let herself imagine when she was sleeping in her car and wondering how she'd survive another day. Some nights, Sophie still dreamed about those days, about the fear and the humiliation and the crushing weight of having lost everything. But she didn't wake up from those dreams terrified anymore. She woke up grateful. Grateful she'd survived. Grateful she'd found courage. Grateful she'd chosen to speak up instead of look away. And grateful that sometimes, when you're brave enough to help someone else, you end up saving yourself. That night, Sophie sat at dinner with Ethan and Lily and Evelyn, listening to Lily explain her very detailed plans for teaching the new baby everything it needed to know, and felt something inside her finally settle. This was home. This was family. This was the life she'd built from ruins. And it was enough, more than enough. It was everything.